Prologue. Samuel Blackwood squinted against the lantern light, examining a promising new silver vein with his loyal foreman, Miguel Fuentes. The narrow tunnel forced both men to crouch, their breath creating small clouds in the cool underground air. "What do you think?" Sam asked, running his calloused finger along the glittering seam. "Is it worth pursuing?" Miguel tilted his head, studying the formation with experienced eyes. "Could be the richest one yet, boss. See how it widens here?" He pointed to where the vein disappeared into the rock wall. "My father would call this la bendición de plata, the silver blessing." Sam nodded, feeling the familiar surge of excitement that came with a new discovery. At 46, his face showed the weathering of Colorado's harsh elements and the deeper lines of grief, but at this moment, a boyish enthusiasm brightened his dark eyes. "Let's bring in Johnson and his crew tomorrow to start the expansion," Sam said, making a notation in his small leather-bound notebook. "If this vein runs as deep as we suspect, we'll need to reinforce this entire section." As they made their way back through the tunnels toward daylight, Miguel cleared his throat. "Don Samuel, there is something I must tell you." Sam recognized the formal address. Miguel only used it when discussing serious matters. "What is it, not more trouble with those claim jumpers from Central City?" No, it is about Luisa." Miguel's voice held pride mixed with concern. "She is expecting our 4th child. The doctor confirmed it yesterday." "That's wonderful news." Sam clapped his friend on the shoulder. "Congratulations." Miguel nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Gracias, but Luisa will not be able to help with Jenny as much now. Already she is very tired, and the doctor says this pregnancy may be difficult." The reminder of his daughter sent a pang of guilt through Sam's chest. Luisa had been invaluable in caring for Jenny after school while Sam worked, often keeping her for dinner when he was delayed at the mine. "Of course," Sam said quickly. "Jenny is my responsibility. Luisa has done far too much already." They emerged from the mine into the afternoon light, blinking against the sudden brightness. The October sun cast long shadows across the mining camp, where men worked sorting ore and maintaining equipment. Sam nodded to several workers as he and Miguel made their way toward the office building. "I should head home early today," Sam said, consulting his pocket watch. "Jenny will be back from school by now." Miguel hesitated. "Perhaps I will walk with you part way. Luisa asked me to bring some dried herbs for Jenny's nightmares." Sam felt another twinge of guilt. Even with their own concerns, the Fuentes family continued looking after his daughter. "That's thoughtful of her. The nightmares have been worse lately." They walked in companionable silence through Silver Creek, the small mining town that had grown around Sam's successful operation. Shopkeepers greeted them with respectful nods. Sam Blackwood was the town's primary employer, and a fair one at that. As they approached Sam's 2-story house on the edge of town, Miguel handed over a small cloth bag. "Lavender and chamomile. Luisa says to brew it weak for a child, with honey." "Thank her for me," Sam said, tucking the packet of herbs into his coat pocket. "And Miguel, take good care of her. The mine can manage if you need more time at home." Miguel's expression softened with gratitude. "Gracias, patron. You are a good man." As Miguel departed, Sam noticed an unfamiliar horse tied to his front porch railing. He quickened his pace, worry creasing his brow. The worry proved justified when he opened his front door to find Jenny's schoolteacher, Miss Caroline Perkins, waiting in his parlor. Her usual neat appearance was slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running, and her expression showed concern and frustration. "Miss Perkins," Sam said, removing his hat, "is something wrong?" The young teacher rose from her seat, clutching a folded paper. "Mr. Blackwood, I apologize for coming to your home unannounced, but I felt this couldn't wait." Sam set his mining gear by the door. "Is Jenny hurt?" "Not physically," Miss Perkins replied, handing him the note. "She's skipped school again. It's the 3rd time this month. Today she attended morning lessons but disappeared after lunch. When I went to look for her, I found this on her desk." Sam unfolded the paper to find Jenny's careful handwriting. Gone to visit Mama. Don't worry." His heart sank. Jenny had been leaving similar notes more frequently lately, before disappearing to the cemetery where Catherine was buried. "I checked the cemetery," Miss Perkins continued. "She was there, talking to her mother's headstone. I didn't want to intrude on her grief, but she can't keep missing lessons, Mr. Blackwood." Sam rubbed his forehead, feeling the beginning of a headache. "I understand. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." Miss Perkins hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, Jenny is a bright child, but her schoolwork is suffering. More concerning is her isolation from other children. She sits alone at lunch and rarely participates in games." "What do you suggest?" Sam asked, feeling completely out of his depth. Catherine had handled all matters relating to Jenny's education and social development. "She needs stability and attention," Miss Perkins said, then added more gently, "and perhaps someone to talk to about her mother, someone who understands loss." Sam nodded stiffly. "Is Jenny home now?" "Yes, I walked her back myself. She's upstairs." After seeing Miss Perkins out, Sam climbed the stairs to Jenny's room. He knocked softly on the door. "Jenny? May I come in?" Silence greeted him, and then a small voice said, "It's open." He found his daughter sitting on her bed, a book open on her lap, though her eyes weren't focused on the pages. At 10, Jenny was small for her age, with his dark hair and Catherine's blue eyes. It was a combination that squeezed his heart every time he looked at her, and a constant reminder of his childhood sweetheart. "Miss Perkins came by," he said, sitting carefully on the edge of her bed. Jenny didn't look up. "Am I in trouble?" "No, but I am worried. You can't keep missing school, Jenny." "I just wanted to talk to Mama," she said, her voice small. "I had a bad dream last night that I forgot what she looked like." Sam swallowed hard. "Your mother would want you to get your education. She valued learning, remember?" Jenny finally looked up at him, her eyes too solemn for a child. "Do you still talk to her?" The question caught him off guard. Did he still talk to Catherine? In his mind, constantly. Out loud? Never. He couldn't bring himself to visit her grave more than absolutely necessary. "I think about her every day," he answered carefully. Jenny seemed to consider this. "Does it make you sad when I talk about her?" "No," he lied. "You can always talk about your mother." Before Jenny could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Sam squeezed her hand. "We'll continue this conversation later. Why don't you wash up for dinner?" Downstairs, he found his best friend, Dr. Thomas Grant, on the porch. He had a chess set tucked under one arm and a bottle of whiskey in the other hand. "It's Wednesday," Tom reminded him unnecessarily. "Chess night." Sam ran a hand through his hair. "I forgot. It's been a complicated day." "All the more reason for chess and conversation," Tom said, already stepping inside. "How's my favorite patient?" he called up the stairs to Jenny. Jenny appeared at the top of the staircase, a small smile forming. It was the first Sam had seen in days. "Did you bring peppermints?" she asked eagerly. Tom patted his coat pocket. "Would I forget? But only after dinner." As they moved to the kitchen, Tom immediately noticed Jenny's untouched dinner plate from lunch still sitting on the table. He raised an eyebrow at Sam but said nothing until Jenny had gone to wash her hands. "Did you miss lunch too?" Tom asked quietly. Sam nodded, moving to the stove to reheat the stew Louisa had brought over yesterday. Miss Perkins came by. Jenny skipped school again to visit Catherine's grave. Tom placed the chessboard at the far end of the table. "And how many days have you worked from dawn until dusk this week?" "That's different," Sam protested. "The new silver vein will still be there if you take time for your daughter," Tom interrupted. "Sam, it's been 2 years. "I know exactly how long it's been," Sam said sharply, then lowered his voice as Jenny returned. "Let's discuss this later." Dinner was a quiet affair, though Tom made valiant efforts to engage Jenny in conversation about school. She answered politely but without enthusiasm, pushing food around her plate more than eating it. After Jenny went upstairs to prepare for bed, The two men settled in Sam's office with the chessboard between them and glasses of whiskey at their elbows. "Your move," Tom said, both literally and figuratively. Sam moved a pawn without much thought. "Miguel told me Luisa is expecting again." "Yes, I saw her yesterday. 4th pregnancy at 34 and so soon after her last birth. She'll need to be careful." "She can't help with Jenny anymore," Sam said, staring at the board without seeing it. Tom studied his friend instead of the chess pieces. "You need help, Sam. Not just with Jenny's practical care, but with her heart. The dust collecting on Catherine's piano, Jenny's withdrawal, and your workaholic tendencies. You're both drowning in grief." Sam took a long swallow of whiskey. "What do you suggest? I can hire a housekeeper?" "You need more than a housekeeper." Tom moved his bishop. "Jenny needs a mother figure, someone who can guide her through growing up. And you," he added pointedly, "need a partner, someone to share the burden." "If you're suggesting I court one of the eligible women in town—" "I'm suggesting nothing of the sort," Tom interrupted. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. "I'm suggesting something more practical." Sam unfolded the Denver newspaper to a page of advertisements. There were 5 mail-order bride listings. He stared at Tom in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Perfectly serious," Tom replied, moving his knight. "It's a practical solution. Many respectable women back east seek opportunities they can't find there. Widows, spinsters, women who want more than their limited circumstances allow." "A mail-order bride," Sam repeated. "Marrying a stranger. Is it any stranger than most society marriages? At least this way you can be honest about your expectations," Tom countered. "You need a partner, not a romance. Someone mature enough to understand that arrangement." Sam pushed the paper away. "It feels like betraying Catherine." Tom's voice softened. "Catherine loved you both too much to want you living half-lives. She'd want Jenny to have a mother's guidance, and you to have companionship." "Checkmate in 3 moves," Sam said, pointing to the board. Tom glanced down, surprised to find Sam had backed him into an inescapable position, despite his apparent distraction. "Well played," Tom conceded. "Just promise me you'll consider it." He tapped the newspaper. "For Jenny's sake, if not your own." After Tom left, Sam climbed the stairs to check on Jenny. He found her asleep but restless, her small face troubled even in dreams. Carefully, he tucked the blankets around her shoulders and brushed a dark curl from her forehead. "I miss her too," he whispered. Later that night, Sam sat in his office surrounded by mining reports, the newspaper Tom had left open on his desk. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating Catherine's portrait on the wall. Her gentle smile was frozen in time, and her eyes followed him with an expression he once found comforting, but now seemed almost accusatory. "What would you have me do?" he asked the silent portrait. The only answer was the ticking of the clock and the distant howl of a coyote. With a deep breath, Sam pulled out a pen and paper. He would place an ad. He would ask for a woman who wanted security rather than romance, one old enough to understand the arrangement he proposed. He would be completely honest about his age, his situation with Jenny, and his lack of romantic intentions. "This is for Jenny," he told Catherine's portrait as he began to write. "Not to replace you. Never to replace you." The pen scratched across the paper as Sam drafted his first letter, unknowingly setting in motion events that would change all their lives. Chapter 1. Eleanor Thornton sat alone in her once elegant Boston parlor, now stripped of its finery with auction tags hanging from the remaining furniture. At 42 years of age, her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through the remnants of her 20-year marriage to Harold. The grandfather clock in the hallway, soon to belong to someone else, chimed 3 times, its familiar sound now a reminder of all she was losing. Eleanor placed another book in the small wooden crate beside her chair. This one, a volume of Tennyson's poetry, had been hidden behind Harold's financial ledgers on the bookshelf. He had considered poetry sentimental nonsense, unworthy of a banker's wife. A waste of time for a woman with household duties, he'd once said, snatching it from her hands. What would my clients think if they saw my wife indulging in such frivolity? Eleanor ran her fingers over the worn cover. She had retrieved it later that night and kept it hidden, reading by candlelight after Harold had fallen asleep. Now she could read whatever she wished, though the freedom had come at a terrible cost. The knock at the front door startled her. Eleanor wasn't expecting visitors. Most of their Harold's friends had disappeared after news of his financial ruin had spread through Boston society. She smoothed her black morning dress, noting the frayed cuffs she'd carefully turned inside to hide the wear, and went to answer the door. Rebecca Thornton stood on the doorstep, her expensive black silk morning dress adorned with more jet beading than strictly necessary. Harold's sister did not wait for an invitation before sweeping past Eleanor into the foyer. "I see you've wasted no time disposing of my brother's possessions," Rebecca said, eyeing the auction tags throughout the entry hall. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Good afternoon, Rebecca. This is unexpected." Rebecca removed her gloves with deliberate slowness. "Someone from the family should ensure Harold's things are handled properly. I've come to select a few mementos before strangers paw through his belongings." "Of course," Eleanor said, though Harold had never kept anything of sentimental value. His possessions, like his wife, had been status symbols meant to impress others rather than bring joy. Rebecca followed Eleanor to the parlor, her disapproving gaze taking in each auction tag with a small sniff. "I see you've kept your books," she said, nodding toward the wooden crate. "How typical." Eleanor sat in her chair, leaving Rebecca to choose between the settee with its faded upholstery or the straight-backed chair Harold had preferred. Rebecca chose neither, remaining standing to maintain her advantage. "The family has been discussing your situation," Rebecca announced. Eleanor felt a familiar tightness in her chest. It was the same sensation she'd experienced whenever Harold had said, "We need to discuss your behavior." She forced her voice to remain steady. "My situation? You're 42, childless, and now penniless," Rebecca stated flatly. "The scandal of Harold's debts has made your social position untenable. You'll need to support yourself." "I'm aware of that," Eleanor said, her fingers twisting in her lap. Rebecca paced the small parlor, her skirt swishing imperiously. "Cousin William might have a position for you at his school. Teaching is appropriate for someone of your background. You were a teacher when you married Harold, after all." Her tone suggested Eleanor had somehow tricked her brother into an advantageous match. Eleanor bit back a retort. She had loved teaching before marriage, finding a purpose in opening young minds to literature and history. Harold had demanded she give it up immediately after their wedding. "A Thornton wife does not work," he had proclaimed, as if her teaching had been a shameful secret. "I've also spoken with Aunt Margaret," Rebecca continued. "She's willing to let you stay in her sewing room until you find suitable accommodations. It would be cramped, but beggars can't be choosers." Aunt Margaret, who had once said Eleanor would bring down the family with her common ways. She had criticized everything from Eleanor's posture to her penmanship. The thought of living under her scrutiny made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Thank you for your concern," Eleanor managed. "I'll consider my options carefully." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "What options?" "The house will be sold, your furnishings auctioned. Unless you've been secretly hoarding money," her gaze sharpened. "Harold always said you were wasteful with household accounts." The accusation stung. Eleanor had stretched every penny, enduring Harold's weekly inspections of the household ledger, where he questioned each expenditure, no matter how necessary. "I haven't been hoarding money," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than she intended, "and I don't recall asking for the family's assistance." Rebecca's mouth tightened. "Don't be proud, Eleanor. It doesn't suit a woman in your position. Where else would you go? Who would want a middle-aged widow with no fortune and no accomplishments beyond pouring tea correctly?" Before Eleanor could respond, Another knock sounded. She excused herself, grateful for the interruption, and opened the door to find Mr. Holloway, the bank manager, on her doorstep. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, removing his hat, "I apologize for the intrusion. I've brought the final paperwork regarding the house sale." Eleanor led him to Harold's study, leaving Rebecca to fume in the parlor. Mr. Holloway, a thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, seemed uncomfortable as he placed several documents on the desk. "I'm afraid the news isn't good, Mrs. Thornton," he said quietly. "After settling your husband's outstanding debts, there will be virtually nothing left." Eleanor nodded, having expected this. The hidden ledgers she'd found in Harold's desk had told the story. The years of increasingly desperate gambling, loans from questionable sources, and money moved from one account to another. "The house must be vacated within 30 days, Mr. Holloway continued. "The new owners are eager to take possession." "I understand," Eleanor said, signing where indicated. Mr. Holloway hesitated before adding, "Mrs. Thornton, if I may, my sister runs a boarding house for respectable women in Cambridge. It's modest but clean. If you need temporary lodging—" The kindness almost undid her. "Thank you," she whispered. After he left, Eleanor returned to find Rebecca examining the contents of her book crate. Tennyson, Austen, what would Harold say? Rebecca clicked her tongue. "I've selected a few items I'd like to take. Harold's father's watch, the silver service, and the landscape painting in the dining room." Eleanor felt a flicker of anger. The silver service had been a wedding gift from her own parents, who had scraped together every penny to provide it. But she was too tired to argue. "Take what you want, Rebecca," she said wearily. Rebecca gathered her gloves. "Remember what I said about teaching, unless you'd prefer being someone's unpaid companion. Though at your age, even that might be difficult to secure." She paused at the door. "I'll tell Aunt Margaret to expect you by the end of the month." After Rebecca left, Eleanor returned to her packing, adding her mother's porcelain figurine, a small shepherdess with a gentle smile, to the crate. It was one of the few possessions Harold had allowed her to keep displayed, though he had relegated it to a shadowy corner where guests wouldn't notice its modest craftsmanship. Evening shadows lengthened across the room as Eleanor continued sorting through the detritus of her marriage. In a drawer of Harold's desk, beneath a stack of calling cards, she found a folded newspaper. Opening it, she discovered several advertisements circled in ink for mail-order brides seeking husbands in Western territories. Had Harold been considering such arrangements for a niece or cousin? Then, a thought struck her suddenly. Had he been planning to divorce her and seek someone new? Someone younger, more biddable? One advertisement in particular caught her eye. "Wife wanted. A mining widower in good circumstances seeks a respectable woman of mature years for companionship and to help raise my 10-year-old daughter. Must be educated, kind, and willing to embrace frontier life in Colorado territory. Age 35 to 45 preferred, as younger women have not proven suitable for challenging mountain living." Eleanor read it 3 times. Of mature years and age 35 to 45 preferred seemed aimed directly at her. Not a young bride wanted for beauty and childbearing, but a companion, someone educated and kind. She moved to the mirror that hung above the fireplace, studying her reflection in the fading light. Auburn hair now streaked with silver, fine lines around her eyes from years of smiling when she felt like crying. But her posture remained straight, and her hazel eyes were clear and intelligent. Not beautiful, perhaps, but still attractive in a quiet way. Would anyone want a woman her age? This mining widower apparently might. A strange feeling fluttered in her chest. It was not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been absent for so very long she barely recognized it. The alternative was moving into Aunt Martha's sewing room, enduring daily reminders of her failure, and accepting Rebecca's condescending charity. It seemed completely unbearable. Eleanor looked again at the advertisement, then at her reflection. 20 years ago, she had married a man who wanted a decorative, obedient wife to enhance his social standing. She had spent 2 decades shrinking herself to fit his expectations, becoming nearly invisible. "No more," she said out loud to her reflection. "No more." She carefully tore out the advertisement and placed it in her book of poetry. Tomorrow, she would visit the post office and write to this mining widower in Colorado. The worst he could do was reject her inquiry, and Eleanor Thornton had survived far worse rejections than that. Chapter 2. Eleanor received Sam's first letter at her cousin Mary's cramped Boston apartment, where she'd been temporarily staying since the auction of her home. She had been grateful when Mary had offered her a place to stay, and that she hadn't needed to live with Harold's aunt. But Eleanor knew she couldn't take advantage of Mary's hospitality for long. The cream-colored envelope bore a Colorado postmark and handwriting that was neat but clearly masculine. There were strong, even strokes, with no unnecessary flourishes. "Is this letter from when you answered that ad to be a mail-order bride?" Mary asked, setting a cup of tea beside Eleanor at the small kitchen table. Eleanor nodded, carefully opening the envelope with a letter opener. Her heart fluttered with apprehension. What would his response be? Would he decide she was too old, even though her age was within his requirement? Too educated, not educated enough? "Well, don't keep me in suspense," Mary urged, sitting across from her. At 35, Mary worked as a clerk in a milliner's shop, her spinsterhood a constant source of dismay to her mother, but a point of private pride to herself. Eleanor unfolded the letter, scanning the first few lines before reading aloud. "Dear Mrs. Thornton, thank you for your response to my advertisement. You are the only applicant who didn't attempt to misrepresent her age or circumstances, which I appreciate. I believe in straightforward dealings in all matters, including this unusual arrangement." "How romantic," Mary said with a grin. Eleanor shot her a look before continuing. "Silver Creek is a growing mining town with approximately 500 residents. My silver mine employs nearly 100 men and has proven consistently profitable. I own a 2-story home at the edge of town with modern conveniences, including indoor plumbing and a kitchen range. As I mentioned in my advertisement, my primary concern is for my daughter Jenny, who is 10 years old and has been without a mother's influence for 2 years. She is bright, but increasingly withdrawn, and the woman who has been helping with her care is now unable to continue. Jenny needs a woman's guiding hand from someone patient enough to understand her loss." Eleanor paused, struck by the honesty in his description of his daughter's situation. Harold would never have admitted to any problem that might reflect poorly on the Thornton name. "Go on," Mary encouraged. "About myself. I am 46 years old, a widower these past 2 years. I work long hours but provide well. I am not seeking romance or physical affection, but rather a partnership based on mutual respect and common purpose. I would offer security, comfort, and protection in exchange for your care of Jenny and the management of our household. If these terms are acceptable to you, please respond with any questions you may have. I've enclosed a photograph of myself and Jenny taken last Christmas. Respectfully, Samuel Blackwood." Eleanor reached into the envelope and withdrew a small tin-type photograph. It showed a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair, standing beside a small girl with solemn eyes. Neither was smiling. Mary took the photograph and examined it. "He seems substantial." "Substantial?" Eleanor repeated, amused despite her nervousness. "Not handsome in the conventional sense, but solid, dependable-looking." Mary handed back the photograph. "And the child looks sad. What will you tell him?" Eleanor stared at the image. Samuel Blackwood didn't resemble Harold in the slightest. Where Harold had been slender and fair with delicate features, this man was rugged, with a square jaw and weathered skin. His eyes seemed to hold a directness that was both intimidating and refreshing. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "It seems so drastic. Moving across the country to marry a stranger?" More drastic than moving into Aunt Margaret's sewing room and listening to her lecture you about your failings until you die of old age or irritation? Mary asked, arching an eyebrow. Eleanor winced. She'd been at Mary's apartment for 3 weeks, and already Aunt Harriet, Mary's mother, visits had become almost unbearable. Just yesterday, Aunt Harriet had arrived unannounced, ostensibly to bring Eleanor some hand-me-down clothing, but really to interrogate her about her plans. "You can't impose on Mary's charity forever," Aunt Harriet had sniffed, eyeing the folding screen that barely concealed Eleanor's cot in the corner of the sitting room. "A woman your age should know her place and accept it gracefully. You need to find a way to support yourself." The memory strengthened Eleanor's resolve. "I think I'll write back to him," she decided. "I will ask more about Silver Creek and what his expectations would be." "It's an awful decision," came a voice from the doorway, causing both women to start. "Whatever are you thinking, Eleanor? Rushing into correspondence with strange men in the wilderness? What would your late husband think?" Mary gave a small sigh. "Mother, I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," Aunt Harriet said, removing her gloves as she surveyed the small apartment with her usual disapproval. "Mary, I came to remind you about Sunday dinner. Your father's business associate will be joining us." She gave Mary a meaningful look before turning her attention to Eleanor. "I didn't realize you were still entertaining this desperate scheme." Eleanor carefully refolded Samuel's letter. "It's hardly desperate to consider an opportunity for a fresh start." Aunt Harriet snorted. "Fresh start? More likely a fresh grave. Do you have any idea what happens to spinsters who venture into the untamed territories? Savages, outlaws, disease, and that is assuming this minor is even legitimate and not some murderer luring unsuspecting women to their doom." "Mother," Mary protested. "I'm simply being realistic," Aunt Harriet countered. "A woman Eleanor's age has no business traipsing across the continent chasing fantasies of adventure. The sensible option is to return to teaching and accept the position Cousin William has graciously offered." The position, teaching arithmetic to 7-year-olds at Cousin William's school for a pittance, while living in his drafty attic, had been presented as a magnanimous rescue rather than the exploitation it was. "I appreciate everyone's concern," Eleanor said carefully, "but I haven't made any decisions yet." "See that you make the right one," Aunt Harriet advised, before turning her attention to Mary. "Now, about Sunday." Later that evening, after Aunt Harriet had finally departed and Mary had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper. She read Samuel Blackwood's letter again, studying each word for hidden meanings or warning signs, but found only straightforward honesty. "Mutual respect and common purpose," she murmured. After 20 years of being Harold's trophy, the prospect of being someone's partner, even without love, held undeniable appeal. She began to write. Over the next 2 months, letters flowed between Boston and Silver Creek. Samuel's descriptions of mining life grew more detailed with each exchange. He wrote about the challenges of extracting ore from the mountain, the men he employed, and the small town that had grown around his successful operation. He described the beauty of the mountains, the harshness of winter, and his concern for Jenny's education in a frontier school. "The teacher tries her best," he wrote, "but many children attend sporadically due to family obligations. Jenny is ahead of most students her age, which only increases her isolation. Your teaching experience would be invaluable." Eleanor shared her background in education, her love of literature, and carefully edited details of her marriage. She mentioned Harold's position as a banker, but omitted his cruelty and gambling, saying only that his death had left her in reduced circumstances. She described her enjoyment of household management while skipping over Harold's demeaning inspections of her work. Throughout their correspondence, neither mentioned love nor attraction. Instead, they focused on what they could offer each other: security and a home from him, education and care for his daughter from her. It was a practical partnership between two adults who had outgrown youthful romanticism. Eleanor's final decision came after a particularly difficult Sunday dinner at her aunt's home. where the conversation had centered on her predicament, as if she weren't present. Cousin William had patted her hand condescendingly while describing the attic room that awaited her. It is small, but adequate for someone with your limited needs. The following day, Eleanor took her wedding ring Harold had given her, a heavy gold band with diamonds that had always felt more like a shackle than a symbol of love, to a jeweler on Washington Street. "This was my grandmother's," she lied to the appraiser, unwilling to admit she was selling her own wedding ring. "Family circumstances require me to part with it." The price it fetched was less than she hoped, but enough for a train ticket west and a small reserve for emergencies. That afternoon, she posted her acceptance letter to Samuel Blackwood. His response came swiftly, containing details of her journey, additional train fare to ensure your comfort, and a small silver brooch with a delicately carved mountain scene. "This is from the first vein I discovered," he wrote. "Silver Creek residents recognize it as the origin of our town's prosperity. Wearing it will mark you as connected to the community upon your arrival." Eleanor found the practical gift strangely touching. Harold's presence had always been ostentatious displays meant to impress others, rather than please her. On the westbound train, Eleanor touched the silver brooch pinned to her traveling suit and watched eastern forests give way to rolling plains. The closer they got to the Rockies, the more her anxiety mingled with exhilaration. "First time heading west?" asked an elegant older woman who had boarded in Chicago and taken the seat opposite Eleanor. "Is it that obvious?" Eleanor asked with a small smile. "You have that look of terror coupled with determination." The woman extended a gloved hand. "I'm Constance Palmer. I'm heading to my son's ranch in Wyoming after burying my husband of 40 years. "I'm pleased to meet you. I'm Eleanor Thornton," she replied, then hesitated. "Soon to be Blackwood. I'm traveling to meet my fiancé." Constance's shrewd eyes took in Eleanor's age and traveling alone. "Mail-order arrangement?" Eleanor flushed. "Is that also obvious?" "Only to someone who's known a dozen women making the same journey," Constance said kindly. "My neighbor's sister, our town school teacher, even my own niece. They all found husbands through correspondence. Some marriages are happier than others, but all are better than being at the mercy of relatives who view unmarried women as burdens." The accuracy of this assessment startled a laugh from Eleanor. "You've described my situation perfectly." As their journey continued and the landscape transformed from Eastern civilization to Western wilderness, they developed an easy friendship. Constance offered practical advice about frontier living, from treating leather goods to preserving vegetables through mountain winters. "Always keep a separate emergency fund," Constance advised, as they watched the sunset paint the plains in brilliant orange. "My Herbert was a good man, but I maintained my own savings from selling butter and eggs. Independence within marriage is not disloyalty, it's insurance. My future husband seems very straightforward about his expectations," Eleanor said, pulling out Samuel's letters. "He's not seeking romance, just partnership." Constance looked amused. "Men often don't know what they're seeking until they find it. My Herbert proposed by saying he required efficient household management and ended up reading me poetry on our 40th anniversary. She patted Eleanor's hand. "Don't discount the possibility of affection developing, my dear, but be prepared for the realities of frontier life. It's not for the faint-hearted." The train whistle blew, signaling their approach to another small station. Eleanor calculated they were still 2 days from her destination, where Samuel Blackwood would be waiting at the Silver Creek station. "Are you frightened?" Constance asked gently. Eleanor considered the question as she clutched Samuel's letters. "Terrified," she admitted. "I may have made a terrible mistake." She gazed out at the unfamiliar landscape, so different from Boston's crowded streets. "Yet I feel more alive than I have in decades." Constance smiled. "That, my dear, is the feeling of controlling your destiny. Whatever awaits in Silver Creek, remember you have the courage to choose it." As the train rumbled westward, Eleanor watched the stars emerge in a sky vaster than any she'd seen before. For better or worse, she was heading toward a new life of her own making. The thought was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Chapter 3. The train whistle pierced the mountain air as Eleanor got her first glimpse of Silver Creek. There were a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines and snow-capped peaks. After days of traveling, the landscape had transformed from flat plains to increasingly dramatic mountains, but nothing had prepared her for the majesty of this view. "Silver Creek, next stop," called the conductor, making his way through the passenger car. "Silver Creek, 10 minutes stop." Eleanor gathered her small traveling bag with trembling hands. Constance Palmer, her traveling companion these past days, reached across to straighten Eleanor's collar. "Remember what I told you," Constance said firmly. "Stand tall, speak clearly, and don't show fear. Western men respect a woman who knows her own mind." "What if he's disappointed?" Eleanor whispered, voicing the fear that had grown with each mile. "Then that's his misfortune," Constance replied. "But judging from his letters, Mr. Blackwood seems to be a practical man, seeking a practical arrangement. Just be yourself." The train lurched to a stop, sending Eleanor slightly off balance. Through the window, she could see a small wooden platform where a handful of people waited. Her eyes immediately found Samuel Blackwood. He was unmistakable from his photograph, though the image hadn't captured his imposing height or the breadth of his shoulders. "That's him," she murmured. Constance peered out. "Substantial indeed," she said with approval. "A man built to weather hardship." Eleanor took a deep breath, made sure that the silver brooch Sam had sent was still pinned to her bodice, and made her way to the door as the porter called out final announcements. Constance squeezed her hand before Eleanor descended the train steps, her legs stiff from days of travel. The mountain air was crisp and thin, making her slightly lightheaded, or perhaps that was just nerves. The muddy main street and rough-hewn boardwalks were a stark contrast to Boston's cobblestone avenues. Everything seemed rawer here, less refined, but somehow more vital. Sam Blackwood stood on the platform, his broad shoulders filling a slightly too small Sunday suit, his dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, and his weather-beaten face showing the lines of both hardship and laughter. Half hidden behind him was Jenny, a thin child with her father's dark eyes and a wary expression. The girl wore a blue dress that appeared recently pressed, but slightly too small, as if she had outgrown it, but no one had noticed. For a moment they all stared at one another. Then Sam stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, his voice deeper than Eleanor had imagined from his letters. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." His calloused palm engulfed her smaller hand in a formal handshake. "Welcome to Silver Creek. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "As comfortable as could be expected," Eleanor said, then turned her attention to Jenny. She smiled warmly, bending slightly to the child's level. "And you must be Jenny. Your father has told me so much about you." Jenny didn't respond, merely studying Eleanor with undisguised suspicion. Sam cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Jenny, say hello to Mrs. Thornton." "Hello," the girl muttered, not meeting Eleanor's eyes. An awkward silence fell until Sam gestured toward the end of the platform. "My wagon is just over there. Do you have luggage?" "One trunk," Eleanor said, pointing to where the porter was unloading baggage. As Sam went to retrieve it, Constance leaned out the train window. "Remember, shoulders back and right to me in Laramie." Eleanor nodded gratefully as the train whistle blew again. She watched Constance wave until the train pulled away, taking with it her last connection to her old life. Sam returned with her trunk, lifting it effortlessly onto his shoulder. "This way," he said, leading her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 bay horses. Jenny climbed into the back of the wagon without assistance, while Sam helped Eleanor onto the wooden seat. The unexpected courtesy surprised her. Harold had rarely bothered with such gestures unless others were watching. "The town's grown considerably in recent years," Sam said as they drove down the main street. "We have most necessities, a general store, assayer's office, 2 churches, a small school, and Dr. Grant's medical practice. Eleanor nodded, feeling the curious stares of the townspeople as they passed. A woman sweeping outside a shop paused to watch them. 2 men standing outside what appeared to be a saloon removed their hats respectfully. "Everyone seems to know you," she observed. Sam's expression revealed a flash of discomfort. The mine employs most of the men in town, and in a place this size, news travels quickly. He hesitated. "They're curious about you. We don't get many new residents from the east." They passed a sprawling operation on the edge of town that could only be the Blackwood mine. Workers paused in their tasks, tipping their hats respectfully as Sam drove by. Eleanor noticed the neat organization of the buildings and the solid construction. They were signs of prosperity and good management that aligned with Sam's letters. The wagon turned up a pine-lined drive, leading to a 2-story house set against the backdrop of the mountains. Eleanor felt a surge of relief. Unlike the rough-hewn buildings of the town, the Blackwood house was a proper home. It was larger than she expected, with a wraparound porch and stunning mountain views. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Something in Sam's expression eased slightly. "Catherine designed it," he said, then fell silent, as if regretting the mention of his late wife. Jenny, who had been silent throughout the journey, suddenly spoke. "Mama wanted the porch to wrap all the way around so she could see the mountains from every side." It was the longest sentence the girl had spoken, and Eleanor responded carefully. She had wonderful taste. "The view is magnificent." Jenny's expression closed again, as if she regretted sharing the information. Sam helped Eleanor down from the wagon, then carried her trunk to the house while Jenny trailed behind them. Inside, Eleanor tried to hide her dismay at the state of what had clearly once been a beautiful home. There was dusty furniture, mismatched curtains, and Jenny's toys were scattered everywhere. Books were stacked haphazardly on tables, and a layer of dust covered most surfaces. Most telling was the parlor where a handsome piano sat untouched, sheet music still open as if awaiting the return of the player. A fine layer of dust coated the keys, evidence that no one had played it in a very long time. "I know the house needs attention," Sam said, misinterpreting her silence. "We've managed, but neither Jenny nor I have much skill with household matters." "It's a wonderful home," Eleanor assured him. "It just needs a woman's touch." Jenny made a small noise that might have been a snort. Sam set Eleanor's trunk down in the entryway. "I'll show you to your room. You must be tired after your journey." As they climbed the stairs, Eleanor noticed the walls lined with landscapes and family photographs. One showed a beautiful dark-haired woman holding a toddler-aged Jenny on her lap, both smiling brightly. Catherine Blackwood's presence seemed to permeate the house, watching their every move. "This will be your room for now," Sam said, opening the door to reveal a pleasant guest bedroom with simple furnishings. "The washroom is across the hall. Jenny and I are down at the other end." Eleanor stepped inside, noting the clean but plain bedding and functional furnishings. "This is perfect, thank you." "I thought you might want to rest before dinner," Sam continued. "Jenny and I usually eat around 6, but we can wait if you need more time." "6 is fine," Eleanor assured him. "It will give me a chance to freshen up." An awkward silence fell between them. They were 2 strangers about to embark on an unconventional partnership, neither quite sure how to proceed. "Well," Sam said finally, "I'll leave you to settle in." As he turned to go, Eleanor noticed Jenny lingering in the hallway. "Jenny, did you want to ask Mrs. Thornton something?" Sam prompted. The girl shook her head and disappeared down the hall. Sam sighed. "She'll come around," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "This is an adjustment for all of us." After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had done. She was now over 1,000 miles from everything familiar, in a stranger's home, about to become stepmother to a clearly hostile and unhappy child. "What have I gotten myself into?" she whispered into the empty room. She unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully to bring some sense of order to her chaotic emotions. As she placed her mother's shepherdess figurine on the dresser, she made a small gesture of claiming space, and she heard a floorboard creak outside her door. Opening it quickly, she caught a glimpse of Jenny disappearing down the stairs. Dinner was a quiet affair, with Sam attempting conversation about Eleanor's journey while Jenny pushed food around her plate and responded to direct questions with one-word answers. Eleanor described her train travels, carefully editing out Constance's advice about maintaining independence and instead focusing on the changing landscape. "The mountains are even more beautiful than you described in your letters," she told Sam. He nodded and looked pleased at her words. "They look different every season. You've arrived at a good time before winter makes travel difficult." "Does it snow very much?" Eleanor asked. "Sometimes we're snowed in for weeks," Jenny volunteered unexpectedly. "Last year, Papa had to dig a path all the way to the barn." "That sounds frightening," Eleanor said as she suppressed a shiver. Jenny shrugged. "Mama said it was an adventure. She built snow forts with me." The mention of Catherine seemed to cast a pall over the table. Sam cleared his throat. "Jenny, why don't you show Mrs. Thornton your school books after dinner? She was a teacher in Boston." "I'm tired," Jenny said quickly. "May I be excused?" After she left, Sam ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I apologize for her behavior. She's usually more polite." "It's a difficult situation," Eleanor said. "She's bound to be wary of someone new in her home." Sam looked relieved at her understanding. "There's something else you should know," he said hesitantly. "Jenny has been sleeping in my room since Catherine died. She has nightmares and won't stay in her own room." Eleanor nodded, thinking of the implications. "That's understandable after such a loss. Dr. Grant, who's the town physician and my friend, says she'll outgrow it eventually, but—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "It complicates our arrangement," Eleanor finished for him. "Yes." Sam met her eyes directly. "I want to be clear about expectations. I meant what I wrote in my letters. This is a practical partnership. I'll continue to sleep in my office downstairs until other arrangements can be made." The frankness was both refreshing and awkward. "I understand," Eleanor said. "Perhaps in time, as Jenny adjusts, we can revisit the situation." Later that night, Eleanor unpacked in the guest room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night, coyote calls echoing through the valley, the distant clang of mining equipment from the night shift, and eventually, the muffled sound of Sam comforting Jenny through what must have been another nightmare. Her last thought before drifting to sleep was that the Blackwood household was haunted. Not by Catherine's ghost, but by the absence she had left behind. There was an emptiness that had shaped itself around the woman who was no longer there. Eleanor wondered if there was room in this house for someone new, or if she would forever be trying to fit into a Catherine-shaped void. Yet, for all her doubts, for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor fell asleep in a home where no one would criticize her every move or belittle her thoughts. The freedom, in that simple fact, was worth whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 4. The day before the wedding, Eleanor sat beside Sam in the small white church, facing Reverend Joseph Moore and his wife Abigail. Sunlight streamed through simple stained-glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. 2 days had passed since her arrival in Silver Creek. There had barely enough time to learn the layout of the house, let alone prepare for marriage. Reverend Moore leaned forward in his chair, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Marriage is a sacred commitment," he began, "even when it begins in unconventional circumstances." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. The entire town knew their arrangement by now. She was the mail-order bride from Boston, coming to care for poor Sam Blackwood's difficult daughter. "We're not here to judge," Abigail Moore added quickly, patting Eleanor's hand. "Many fine unions in the West begin as practical arrangements. Our concern is ensuring you both enter this covenant with clear expectations." Sam shifted uncomfortably beside Eleanor. "As I explained, Reverend, Mrs. Thornton and I have corresponded extensively about our arrangement. We both understand this is a partnership of mutual benefit." "Indeed," the minister nodded, "but even practical partnerships require understanding. Mrs. Thornton, what do you hope for in this marriage?" Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Security, purpose, and a chance to use my skills as a teacher and homemaker." She hesitated before adding, "and to help Jenny through her grief, if she'll allow it." "And you, Sam?" Abigail prompted. "What are you seeking beyond household management?" Sam looked startled by the question. Stability for Jenny, a woman's influence in the house. He paused awkwardly. "Companionship, I suppose." Reverend Moore's expression remained gentle, but his eyes were shrewd. "And what of affection, physical companionship?" Sam's neck reddened above his collar. "We haven't. That is, what my husband means," Abigail interjected diplomatically, "is that marriages, even practical ones, involve sharing a life. Expectations about intimacy should be discussed." Eleanor found her voice. "We've agreed to approach our arrangement with respect and patience." She glanced at Sam, who nodded gratefully. "Other aspects may develop in time." "A wise approach," Reverend Moore said. "Remember that trust and affection often grow from respect and shared purpose. The marriages that flourish here aren't always those that began with passion." He exchanged a knowing look with his wife. "Abigail agreed to marry me because her father's farm was failing, and I needed a minister's wife. 38 years later, I can't imagine life without her." Abigail smiled. "What Joseph isn't saying is that he was the most irritating, opinionated man I'd ever met. I married him, certain we'd drive each other to distraction." She reached over to take his hand. "Sometimes God has plans we don't anticipate." As they left the church, Sam cleared his throat. "That was more personal than I expected." "They mean well," Eleanor said, secretly grateful for the Moore's candid approach. "It's good to have these conversations before tomorrow." Sam nodded, looking relieved. "I need to check on something at the mine office. Luisa Fuentes offered to help you with shopping. She should be waiting at the general store." He hesitated. "Will that arrangement suit you?" "Of course," Eleanor said, touched by his consideration, despite his obvious discomfort with wedding preparations. The day before, she had briefly met Sam's foreman, Miguel, his wife, Luisa, and had liked them instantly. The general store sat at Silver Creek's main intersection, its broad wooden porch crowded with barrels and crates. Inside, Eleanor found Luisa Fuentes examining bolts of fabric. At 34, Luisa's petite figure showed the gentle rounding of early pregnancy, and her warm smile immediately put Eleanor at ease. "Mrs. Thornton," she called, waving Eleanor over, "I am so pleased to help you today. There is much to prepare, yes?" "Please call me Eleanor," she replied, liking Miguel's wife instantly. "And I'm grateful for your assistance. I hardly know where to begin." Luisa linked her arm through Eleanor's. "First, household necessities, then perhaps fabric for curtains. The Blackwood house needs brightening." She lowered her voice confidentially. "Sam is a good man but knows nothing about making a home comfortable. Men!" She rolled her eyes expressively. For the next hour, Luisa guided Eleanor through selections of baking supplies, linens, and sundry household items, introducing her to shopkeepers along the way. Unlike Boston's impersonal emporiums, Silver Creek's merchants knew their customers personally, and all seemed intensely curious about Sam Blackwood's mail-order bride. "You'll want sturdy pots," advised Mr. Jenkins, the store owner. "Mountain winters are hard. Stews and such keep a family going." "And extra lamp oil," Luisa added. "The nights grow long, and sometimes snow keeps everyone home for days." Eleanor felt overwhelmed by these preparations for a life so different from what she had known. In Boston, gaslight had illuminated her home, and food deliveries had arrived regularly regardless of weather. As Eleanor examined a display of needlework supplies, the shop bell jangled and a hush fell over the store. A tall woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun entered, her sharp gaze immediately finding Eleanor. "Mrs. Wilson," Louisa murmured. "Town busybody." Eleanor barely had time to register this warning before the woman approached, inspecting Eleanor through narrowed eyes. "So you're the woman Sam Blackwood sent for," she said without preamble. "You're older than I expected." Eleanor straightened her spine, recalling Constance Palmer's advice. "Mr. Blackwood specifically requested someone mature," she replied evenly. "Umph." Mrs. Wilson circled Eleanor as if examining merchandise. "You are from Boston, I hear. What brings a city woman to our little town? Surely not the cultural opportunities." "I came for a fresh start," Eleanor said simply. "And Sam Blackwood's silver mine had nothing to do with your decision?" Mrs. Wilson's voice carried through the now silent store. "He's the wealthiest man in 3 counties, you know." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. "Mr. Blackwood was completely forthright about his circumstances, as I was about mine." The woman's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "How fortunate for you both. Poor widowed Sam, struggling to raise little Jenny alone. Of course he needed help." Her emphasis made the word sound tawdry. Louisa stepped forward, her friendly expression hardened into determination. "Eleanor must finish her shopping, Mrs. Wilson. The wedding is tomorrow, and there is much to do." She turned to Eleanor. "We should look at those spice jars you mentioned." As Louisa steered her toward another aisle, she whispered, "Ignore that old crow." She had hopes for Sam herself after an appropriate mourning period. "She brings Catherine's grave flowers every Sunday and makes sure everyone notices." "I see," Eleanor murmured, understanding Martha's hostility better. "Did Sam ever—" "Never," Louisa assured her. "Sam barely noticed her existence." But Mrs. Wilson cannot forgive being overlooked. By the time they finished shopping, Eleanor had met a dozen townsfolk, most friendly but all curiously assessing. She felt exhausted from maintaining a composed expression while being scrutinized like an exotic specimen. "Don't worry," Louisa said as they walked back to the Blackwood house laden with parcels. "Soon they will find something else to gossip about. Silver Creek is small but not unkind." The wedding morning arrived with a clarity that painted the mountains in vivid detail against a perfect blue sky. Eleanor stood by her bedroom window, her stomach churning with nerves. In a few hours, she would become Mrs. Samuel Blackwood. It was a name that still felt foreign on her tongue. A soft knock at the door revealed Louisa, who had carried a small basket covered with cloth. "I brought breakfast," she announced, setting it on the dresser. "And I thought you might like help preparing." Relief washed over Eleanor. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to do with my hair." She gestured helplessly at her reflection. "It's not as if I packed for a wedding." Louisa unpacked her basket, revealing pins, ribbons, and a small jar of rose-scented pomade. "Every bride should feel beautiful, even practical ones," she said firmly. As Louisa arranged Eleanor's auburn hair into a simple but elegant style, she chattered about her own wedding to Miguel. How nervous she'd been, and how his mother hadn't approved of her common family. "Now she cannot imagine life without me," Louisa laughed. "Sometimes the beginning is difficult, but the journey improves." Eleanor wore her best dress, a dove-gray silk that had been fashionable in Boston 3 seasons ago. As Louisa fastened the last button, she produced a blue handkerchief embroidered with delicate flowers. "Colorado columbines," Louisa explained, "for your something borrowed. It brought me luck with Miguel." Eleanor blinked back unexpected tears. "You hardly know me, yet you've been so kind." "We are to be friends," Louisa said simply, "and friends help each other." Downstairs, Eleanor found Jenny sulking in a blue dress that matched her eyes but chafed at her freedom. Sam stood awkwardly in the parlor, wearing a black suit that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. When he saw Eleanor, his expression softened with something like relief. "You look very nice," he said, the words formal but sincere. "Thank you," Eleanor replied. "You're quite handsome yourself." Jenny rolled her eyes at this exchange. "Can we go now? I want this over with." "Jenny," Sam admonished, but Eleanor shook her head. "It's fine," she said quietly. "This is difficult for everyone." The church was decorated simply, with wild flowers arranged in glass jars. Only a dozen attendees were present. There were Miguel, Louisa, and their children, Dr. Tom Grant, and a few miners Sam introduced as his foreman. Jenny refused to stand with them during the ceremony, sitting stiffly in the front pew in her dress, her expression mutinous. Eleanor knew she should be listening to Reverend Moore's words about commitment and partnership, but her mind kept drifting. She was marrying a man she barely knew, promising to care for a child who clearly resented her, and in a town where she was an outsider. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her. Then Sam's hand took hers as he slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, and she noticed his fingers trembled slightly. He was nervous too, she realized. This strange, strong man was just as uncertain about their arrangement as she was, yet he was honoring his commitment. Sam's awkward kiss on Eleanor's cheek sealed their union. It was a brief brush of warm lips against her skin that somehow felt more intimate than any of Harold's perfunctory kisses had been. "Mrs. Blackwood," Sam whispered, the name sounding different in his deep voice. The small reception at the church hall featured homemade cakes and punch, with townsfolk curious but reserved as they studied the new Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor accepted congratulations with what she hoped was gracious composure, though she felt like an actress in an unfamiliar play. From across the room, she caught fragments of Mrs. Wilson's conversation with another older woman, chasing after Sam's mining fortune, and trying to replace poor sainted Catherine, who was beloved by everyone. Eleanor's hands tightened around her punch cup. Sam appeared beside her, noticing her discomfort but misinterpreting its cause. "It's almost over," he said, awkwardly patting her hand. "Wedding nerves are natural, I'm told." She managed to smile, not wanting to begin their marriage by complaining about town gossip. "It's been lovely. Everyone has been very welcoming." This wasn't entirely a lie. Many had been genuinely kind, particularly the Reverend Moore, Abigail, and Dr. Grant. When they finally returned home, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in flame. Jenny immediately disappeared upstairs, claiming fatigue, although it was barely 7 o'clock. Sam showed Eleanor to the master bedroom, which she had not yet seen. Unlike the rest of the house, this room appeared relatively untouched. A large 4-poster bed dominated the space, covered with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. "Catherine made that," Sam said, following her gaze. She enjoyed quilting during the winters. Eleanor nodded, uncertain how to respond. The room felt like a shrine, preserved precisely as Catherine had left it. Sam cleared his throat. "I've put fresh linens on the bed. I thought you would be more comfortable here than in the guest room. I have explained to Jenny that she is to sleep in her own room from now on." He moved to a chest, removing several items. "I'll sleep in my office downstairs until we decide otherwise." Eleanor understood his meaning. Their marriage would remain unconsummated for now. She felt a relief given their still formal relationship, but also a reminder of its practical nature. "Thank you," she said. "That seems sensible while we all adjust." He nodded, gathering blankets and a nightshirt. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time. "And thank you for coming all this way, for taking a chance on us." After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over Catherine's quilt. She was now Mrs. Samuel Blackwood, stepmother to Jenny, and mistress of this house, haunted by memories of another woman. The gold band on her finger caught the lamplight, a symbol of promises made but not yet tested. "Well, Eleanor," she whispered to herself, "you wanted a fresh start. Now you have one, for better or worse." She only hoped that Silver Creek would eventually feel like home. and that someday she might belong here as more than just Catherine's replacement. Chapter 5. Eleanor tackled the neglected Blackwood house with determination, rising early each morning to scrub, dust, and organize before the household stirred. 3 days into her marriage, she had managed to transform the kitchen and dining room from chaotic clutter to functional order. Yet each drawer she opened and cabinet she cleared revealed evidence of the first Mrs. Blackwood. She found monogrammed linens with CB delicately embroidered in the corners, handwritten recipe cards in flowing script, and child's drawings labeled for Mama in Jenny's younger handwriting. Mama liked the kitchen organized by how often she used the spices, not alphabetically, Jenny commented on the 4th morning, watching Eleanor rearrange spice jars. Eleanor paused, a jar of cinnamon in hand. Is that so? Perhaps you could show me how she preferred things. Jenny shrugged. It doesn't matter, you'll just change it anyway. Again, this encounter, like many others she'd had with Jenny since her arrival, left Eleanor feeling like an intruder, occupying another woman's place without permission. She tried to respect Catherine's memory while still establishing her own presence, but the balance felt impossible to strike. After breakfast, while Eleanor sorted through a box of household items in the sitting room, Jenny approached the mantel where Eleanor had placed her mother's porcelain shepherdess with a gentle smile. Was this your Mama's? Jenny asked, picking it up with careless fingers. Yes, Eleanor said, trying to hide her anxiety as Jenny turned the delicate piece. It's very special to me. My mother gave it to me before she died when I was about your age. Jenny's gaze flickered to Eleanor, then back to the figurine. It's pretty, I guess. Not very fancy, though. No, not fancy, Eleanor agreed. But valuable to me all the same. Perhaps you could... The figurine slipped from Jenny's hands, hitting the stone hearth with a sickening crack. The shepherdess's head separated from her body, and one arm shattered completely. Oh, Eleanor gasped, rushing forward. Jenny watched through narrowed eyes as Eleanor knelt to gather the broken pieces, her expression more calculating than apologetic. Sorry. It was an accident. Eleanor fought to control her voice, recognizing the test being administered. Accidents happen, she managed, though her hands trembled as she collected the fragments of her most treasured possession. Something like disappointment flashed across Jenny's face at Eleanor's measured response. She had clearly expected and perhaps hoped for anger or tears. Jenny, Eleanor said carefully, would you like to help me see if we can repair it? No, the girl replied flatly. I have to go feed my rabbit. After Jenny fled outside, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of grief over the shattered figurine, tears sliding down her cheeks as she cradled the pieces. It wasn't just porcelain that had broken, but her last physical connection to her mother and her former life. I won't give her the satisfaction, Eleanor whispered, carefully setting the pieces aside for later repair. Jenny wanted a reason to hate her, and Eleanor refused to provide one so easily. Ever since their wedding, Sam worked from dawn until dusk, leaving notes instead of conversation. That day's message, written in his strong, no-nonsense hand, simply read, At the north shaft until evening, butcher delivered venison. Jenny, remember to feed your rabbit. When Eleanor checked the kitchen, she found a package wrapped in brown paper. There was a cut of meat unlike any she'd prepared in Boston. The cookbooks she'd discovered in the kitchen were filled with recipes calling for ingredients and techniques she'd never encountered. Sourdough starter, Dutch ovens, and measurements like a good pinch or until it looks right. That evening, Sam returned home, too exhausted for more than perfunctory inquiries about their day. He sliced into the venison Eleanor had prepared, which remained stubbornly tough despite hours of cooking. How was the mine today? Eleanor asked, trying to establish some normal conversation as Sam chewed determinedly. Productive, he replied between bites. The new vein is promising. Jenny pushed her barely touched plate away. Papa, can I have bread and jam instead? I'm still hungry. Sam glanced at Eleanor apologetically. Of course, just this once. Eleanor felt her face warm with embarrassment. The beans were scorched, the venison nearly inedible, and the biscuits could serve as doorstops. After a week of similar culinary disasters, she was beginning to wonder if she would ever master frontier cooking. Later that night, after clearing away the mostly uneaten meal, Eleanor retreated to the pantry, where she finally allowed frustrated tears to fall. What had she been thinking? Coming to this wild place where she couldn't even prepare a decent meal. In Boston, she had managed a household with confidence, but she had also had a housekeeper and cook, so she hadn't needed to learn those skills. Here, she felt incompetent at the most basic tasks. "Eleanor?" Sam's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Are you in here?" She hastily wiped her eyes. "Just checking inventory," she called, her voice betraying her despite her efforts. When she emerged, Sam stood awkwardly by the table, clearly uncomfortable with her distress. "The venison. It's difficult to prepare properly," he offered. Catherine struggled with it at first, too. The comparison, though meant to comfort, only emphasized Eleanor's failure to live up to his first wife's eventual success. "I'll improve with practice," she said stiffly. Sam shifted his weight. "Louisa might be willing to share some tips. Her venison stew is quite good." "Thank you. I'll ask her." Eleanor busied herself with wiping down the already clean countertop, unwilling to meet his eyes. After a moment of silence, Sam cleared his throat. "Well, good night then." Eleanor listened to his retreating footsteps, feeling the weight of disappointment, his and her own, settling on her shoulders. The next morning, Eleanor attempted to establish school lessons with Jenny at home. She had noticed the girl's sporadic attendance and hoped to supplement her education during the frequent days she refused to go to school. "Your father mentioned you enjoy history," Eleanor said, laying out the books she'd brought from Boston. They were illustrated volumes of world history she'd treasured as a teacher. Jenny stared at the books without enthusiasm. "School is boring. Miss Perkins makes us do the same lessons over and over for the slow children. Then perhaps we could move ahead at your own pace," Eleanor suggested. "I brought these books specifically thinking you might enjoy them." "Papa doesn't make me do extra schoolwork," Jenny countered, crossing her arms. Eleanor took a steadying breath. "Your father wants you to have a good education. That's partly why I'm here." "You're here because Papa needs someone to cook and clean," Jenny retorted. "Not to be my mother. I already had a mother." The words stung, but Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "I'm not trying to replace your mother, Jenny, but I am trying to help you continue your education, which is something your mother valued." The mention of Catherine softened Jenny's resistance slightly. "She used to read to me every night," she said, "even when she was tired." "Would you like me to read to you?" Eleanor offered. Jenny considered this, then shook her head. "No, Papa does it now." Eleanor bit back her frustration. Every attempt to connect met with the same wall. "Let's start with just one history lesson today," she suggested, "about ancient Egypt. If you truly find it boring, we can try something else tomorrow." Jenny's genuine interest in the pyramids eventually overcame her determination to reject everything Eleanor offered. By the end of the hour, she was asking questions about mummification and hieroglyphics with reluctant fascination. When Sam came home that evening, Eleanor wanted to share this small victory, but he was preoccupied with mining reports and too exhausted to mediate their developing relationship. She found herself trapped between wanting to establish authority and fear of overstepping, never quite sure where the boundaries lay in this precarious family structure. Their first Sunday as a married couple brought a new challenge. She would be attending church services where the entire town would evaluate the new Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best Boston outfit, then helped Jenny prepare despite the girls' complaints about tight shoes and itchy collars. "You look very nice," Eleanor told her, smoothing Jenny's dark hair. "Did your mother make this dress?" Jenny nodded. "For Easter last year. It's too small now." Eleanor noted the short hemline and tight bodice. Perhaps we could let out the seams. I'm quite handy with a needle." "Mama was better," Jenny said automatically, then looked away. "But I guess it's getting too small." This small concession felt like progress, however slight. At the church, Eleanor felt the weight of curious stares as Sam led his new family to a pew near the front. Mrs. Wilson's sharp gaze followed their every move, and whispers rippled through the congregation. "That's her, the mail-order bride. Poor Jenny looks miserable. Catherine always dressed her so beautifully." Eleanor kept her spine straight, an expression serene, though her hands trembled slightly as she found the correct hymn page. Sam seemed oblivious to the scrutiny, nodding respectfully to business associates, while leaving Eleanor to navigate the social complexities alone. After the service, Reverend Moore introduced Eleanor to congregation members, many of whom she hadn't yet met. Some were genuinely welcoming, others barely disguised their curiosity or disapproval. Among the crowd, Eleanor noticed a young blonde woman watching her with particular interest. As the gathering thinned, the woman approached directly. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Caroline Perkins, Jenny's teacher." "Miss Perkins, I'm so pleased to meet you," Eleanor replied, recognizing the name from both Sam and Jenny. "I've been hoping to discuss Jenny's studies with you." Miss Perkins's expression held a hint of wariness. "Sam mentioned you were a teacher in Boston," she said. "Much more sophisticated than our little schoolhouse, I imagine." Eleanor recognized the defensive note in her voice. "Different circumstances require different approaches," she said diplomatically. "I admire anyone who takes on the challenge of frontier education." Some of the tension left Miss Perkins's shoulders. "Jenny mentioned you've been working on history lessons with her." "I'm trying to," Eleanor admitted. "She's resistant, but clearly bright." "Brilliantly stubborn," Miss Perkins agreed with unexpected humor. "She reminds me of Sam. Once she sets her mind against something, moving her requires dynamite." Eleanor laughed, grateful for this moment of genuine understanding. "She's testing me constantly. Yesterday, she accidentally broke my mother's figurine while watching for my reaction." Miss Perkins nodded knowingly. "She does the same at school. She deliberately misses answers she knows perfectly well, then watches to see if I'll correct her." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I think she's afraid to excel without her mother's praise." Catherine attended every school function, beaming with pride at Jenny's achievements. This insight into Jenny's behavior felt invaluable. "Thank you for telling me this. I've been trying to understand her better." "She's worth the effort," Miss Perkins said. "Beneath the defiance is a wounded child who misses her mother terribly." When Sam joined them, Eleanor hoped to continue this conversation, but he quickly steered her toward a group of well-dressed men. "Eleanor, these are investors in the Blackwood mine," he said, then turned to the men. "Gentlemen, this is Jenny's stepmother." Eleanor maintained her pleasant expression, but the introduction struck her like a slap. Not my wife, but Jenny's stepmother. He defined her solely by her function rather than her relationship with him. As the men politely acknowledged her before returning to business discussions, Eleanor felt herself fading into invisibility, her actual personhood irrelevant to her role. The walk home was quiet, Jenny running ahead while Sam seemed lost in thought. Eleanor considered mentioning his introduction to the men, but then decided against it. They were still virtual strangers navigating an uncomfortable arrangement. Perhaps it was unreasonable to expect more so soon. That evening, preparing for another week in her new life, Eleanor tried to focus on the small victories she'd experienced so far. Jenny's reluctant interest in Egyptian mummies, Miss Perkins's insights, and Louisa's offered friendship. Silver Creek was not Boston, Sam was not Harold, and she was no longer the obedient wife forced into invisibility. She had chosen this difficult path freely. As she brushed her hair before the mirror, Eleanor studied her reflection. Behind her, Catherine's quilt spread across the bed. Another woman's creation in another woman's room. But for better or worse, Eleanor Blackwood now lived here too. And somehow, she would find a way to belong. Chapter 6. A few days later, while Jenny was at school, Eleanor decided to organize the cluttered attic. It took her most of the day, and at one point she discovered a cedar chest tucked beneath the eaves. Dust swirled in the beams of afternoon sunlight filtering through the small window as she lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay neatly folded baby clothes. There were tiny gowns and caps that must have been Jenny's, alongside a christening blanket with delicate embroidery. Beneath these treasures, Eleanor found several packets of letters tied with a faded ribbon. She lifted one bundle, recognizing Sam's strong handwriting on the envelopes addressed to Mrs. Catherine Blackwood at various locations. There were letters from Denver, St. Louis, and even briefly in New York. The return addresses showed Sam's travels to mining conferences and equipment suppliers over the years. Eleanor knew she should replace them back in the chest untouched. These were private communications between husband and wife, not meant for her eyes. Yet after 2 weeks of stilted conversations with Sam and Jenny's constant rejection, loneliness drove her to slip the ribbon from one packet. Just one letter, she told herself. Just to understand the family she'd married into. The letter was dated 8 years earlier, when Jenny would have been 2. My dearest Cat. Denver is unseasonably cold, but the chill outside is nothing compared to the coldness of returning to an empty hotel room each night without you. I find myself talking to you anyway, turning to share some observation before remembering you're not beside me. The mining conference is as dull as expected, though the new drilling equipment I mentioned seems promising. I've placed an order for delivery next month, which should improve our yield considerably. Young Jenny's drawing of Papa at work makes me smile each time I look at it, though I'm not certain why she believes I have green hair or 3 arms. Perhaps this is how she imagines me operating the new machinery I described. Your artistic talent clearly hasn't been inherited yet, though your imagination certainly has. 3 more days until I return. The house is not a home without your laughter filling it. Kiss our wild girl goodnight for me, and tell her Papa is bringing a surprise. All my love, Sam. Eleanor carefully refolded the letter, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. Such tenderness from the stoic man who now left her notes about mining schedules and meat deliveries. Such affection in my dearest Cat compared to his formal Eleanor on the rare occasions he used her name at all. Most painful was the contrast between the man who once wrote that a house wasn't a home without Catherine's laughter, and the husband who now barely seemed to notice Eleanor's presence. Against her better judgment, she opened another letter, this one from Catherine to Sam during a visit to her sister in Chicago. My beloved Samuel, I miss our mountain air. The city is exciting but makes me appreciate our simpler life all the more. Jenny has charmed everyone naturally, though she asks for Papa and the big rocks constantly. Last night I dreamed of our meadow, with the wildflowers just beginning to bloom. Do you remember that first spring after we married, when you carried me across that stream and we spent the afternoon with nothing but the sky above us? I think of that day often, especially when we're apart. Sister sends her love, though she still cannot understand why anyone would choose wilderness over civilization. If only she could see the sunset from our porch, or feel how you look at me when I am reading by the fire. Some treasures can't be found in cities. All my heart, your Cat. Eleanor closed the chest, feeling like an intruder in their love story. The letters revealed a deeply passionate relationship, filled with inside jokes, terms of endearment, and intimate details that made her marriage to Sam seem even more like a business arrangement. What are you doing? Jenny's voice came from the attic stairs. Eleanor was startled, feeling inexplicably guilty. Was school out already? Just organizing some things. Jenny's eyes narrowed, focusing on the cedar chest. That's Mama's special trunk. Papa doesn't let anyone touch it. I was just putting it back in order, Eleanor said, closing the lid carefully. There are lovely baby clothes inside. Were they yours? Instead of answering, Jenny crossed her arms. "Why are you going through our things?" "I'm trying to make the house more organized," Eleanor explained. "The attic is quite cluttered." "It was fine before you came," Jenny retorted. "Nobody asked you to change everything." The girl's words crystallized something Eleanor had been feeling since her arrival. The Blackwood house was preserved as a monument to Catherine. Her possessions were untouched, her arrangements maintained, and her spirit lingered in every corner. There was no space for Eleanor to exist except as Catherine's inadequate replacement. But that evening, after Jenny was asleep, Eleanor sat in the sitting room with a notepad, sketching different furniture arrangements and making lists. If she was to build any kind of life here, she needed to carve out space for herself, not to erase Catherine's memory, but to establish her own presence. The next morning, she began methodically. The sitting room would be her starting point. It was the heart of family life, currently dominated by Catherine's embroidered pillows, and arranged exactly as she had left them 2 years earlier. Eleanor purchased fabric from the general store, using some of her dwindling savings to select patterns that complemented the existing furnishings while bringing fresh colors into the room. She moved Sam's heavy leather chair to better catch the morning light for reading. The side tables were rearranged to create a more conversational grouping, and Catherine's collection of pressed wildflower arrangements was carefully relocated to Jenny's bedroom to enjoy more privately. As her projects progressed, Eleanor's funds ran critically short. After a sleepless night, she made the difficult decision to sell her grandmother's gold locket, a simple oval pendant containing a tiny colored sketch of her grandfather. The piece had survived Harold's financial disaster, only because Eleanor had kept it hidden in her sewing basket. Mr. Jenkins at the general store carefully examined the locket. "Fine craftsmanship," he noted, "and good weight to the gold. I can give you $12 for it." It was less than half what Eleanor had hoped, but enough to purchase the remaining supplies she needed. "That will be fine," she said, watching him place her family heirloom in the display case. 3 days later, Sam returned from an extended inspection of a new mining site. Eleanor had completed her transformation of the sitting room, replacing Catherine's embroidered pillows with new covers she had sewn herself. The heavy drapes that had kept the room perpetually dim had been exchanged for lighter curtains that allowed mountain sunlight to flood the space. Sam stopped in the doorway, his expression transforming from weariness to confusion. "What happened here?" he asked, looking around the rearranged room. "I've freshened things up a bit," Eleanor said, trying to sound casual despite her nervousness. "The room gets wonderful morning light now." Sam moved to where his chair had always sat, finding empty space. "Where's my chair?" "By the window," Eleanor explained. "The light is better for reading there." Sam didn't respond but walked slowly around the room, noting each change with deepening silence. He paused by a side table where Catherine's embroidered pillows had been displayed. "Where are Catherine's, thanks?" "I've put them away carefully," Eleanor assured him. "The pillows were quite faded from the sun. I thought Jenny might want them preserved rather than—" "You had no right," Sam interrupted, his voice low but intense. "Those were exactly as Catherine arranged them." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sam, it's been 2 years. I'm trying to make this house work for all of us." "By erasing Catherine's presence?" His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "By replacing her things with yours?" "Not erasing," Eleanor protested. "But yes, making some space for myself, too. I live here now. I'm your wife, even if only in name." Sam shook his head. "You don't understand. This isn't just about furniture or pillows. This is Jenny's connection to her mother." "Jenny has her mother's pictures, her clothes, and her bedroom exactly as it was," Eleanor countered. "But this is a family space, and I'm part of this family now, too." "A family you've been part of for barely 2 weeks," Sam said coldly. "Catherine built this home for 15 years. The unfairness of this comparison stung Eleanor deeply. "And how am I supposed to build anything if I can't touch what's already here?" If I must live like a ghost in Catherine's house? Sam put a hand on his cheek in frustration. That's not what I meant. He glanced toward the fireplace where a new clock sat. Where did this come from? I purchased it, Eleanor said. The other one wasn't working properly. And how did you pay for all these changes? Sam asked. The fabric, the clock, those new curtains? Eleanor hesitated. I had some savings, and... She paused, not sure she wanted to confess that she had sold her grandmother's locket. She quickly changed the subject. I asked Jenny about her mother's pillows. She said she didn't care what happened to them. She's 10 years old and grieving. Sam's voice rose. Of course she said that. She's trying to protect herself. And what about me? Eleanor wanted to ask, but she instinctively knew that expressing her feelings would do no good. Sam stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time, while Eleanor fought back tears of frustration. This isn't what either of us expected, Sam finally said, his voice quieter. No, Eleanor agreed. But it's what we have. Sam picked up his hat from where he'd set it on entering. I need to check something at the mine office, he said, a transparent excuse to escape their conflict. After he left, Eleanor sank onto the sofa. The room's cheerful new appearance now seemed like a hollow victory. She'd created physical space for herself, but widened the emotional distance between them in the process. From the hallway came the sound of small feet, and Eleanor looked up to find Jenny watching her with an unreadable expression. Papa and Mama never fought, Jenny said, her voice containing equal parts accusation and satisfaction. The words twisted like a knife. Everyone disagrees sometimes, Jenny, Eleanor said tiredly. Not them, Jenny insisted. They loved each other. The implication hung in the air between them. Unlike you and Papa, unlike what you're trying to create here. After Jenny retreated upstairs, Eleanor remained in the sitting room she had so carefully rearranged, surrounded by her changes that suddenly felt meaningless. The house seemed to reject her efforts, like a body rejecting a foreign transplant. Eleanor thought of the letters in the cedar chest, of the passionate love they revealed between Sam and Catherine. What am I doing here? She whispered to the empty room. The question echoed without an answer as evening shadows crept across her newly arranged furniture, highlighting the absence of the family she had hoped to join. Chapter 7. On their 1-month anniversary, Eleanor rose early to prepare a special dinner despite the lingering tension that had settled over the household like dust. In Boston, such occasions had passed unremarked in her marriage to Harold, but here in Silver Creek, she hoped it might offer an opportunity to bridge the growing distance between her and Sam. The autumn morning air held a crispness that hinted at the approaching winter. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter as she stood on the back porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. The beauty of this place still took her breath away, even as she struggled to find her place within it. A month, she whispered to herself. Surely we can do better than this. She wrote a brief note to Sam, who had taken to leaving for the mine before breakfast and returning after Jenny was asleep, minimizing their time together since their argument over the sitting room. Sam, I'm preparing a special dinner this evening to mark 1 month since our wedding. If your work allows, perhaps we could dine together at 6 o'clock, Eleanor. The formality of her own words made her wince, but she couldn't find a more natural tone. She'd addressed him as Sam rather than Mr. Blackwood, yet couldn't bring herself to sign it your wife. Their relationship existed in this uncomfortable middle ground. They were more than strangers, but less than true partners. When Miguel arrived to deliver mining reports, Eleanor handed him the note. Would you mind giving this to Mr. Blackwood? She asked. Miguel's kind eyes showed understanding. Of course, Signora. He paused. It is difficult the first months of marriage, even when there is love from the beginning. Eleanor managed to smile. I'm sure you're right. After Miguel left, she threw herself into preparations, determined to make everything perfect. The house was cleaned from top to bottom, and Eleanor tackled a venison roast with renewed determination, following Louisa's detailed instructions. Fresh bread dough rose by the stove, and she even attempted Catherine's apple cake recipe, which she found carefully preserved in the kitchen. By mid-afternoon, the house smelled wonderful, and Eleanor felt a small sense of accomplishment. She had mastered the temperamental stove, learned to gauge measurements by eye rather than precise cups, and adapted to cooking at this higher altitude where water boiled differently and bread rose unevenly. When a mining company messenger arrived with a note from Sam, her heart lifted momentarily. "Eleanor, new equipment orders require my attention at the mine office this evening. Don't wait dinner for me. Sam." Disappointment washed over her, followed by anger that he couldn't spare even one evening for them to try bridging the gulf between them. Then, with a sigh, she reminded herself that the mine was his livelihood and responsibility to hundreds of workers. Perhaps the orders truly couldn't wait. "This changes nothing," she told herself firmly. "We'll still have a proper dinner." When Jenny returned from school, Eleanor suggested they use Catherine's good china as a gesture of goodwill. She wanted to acknowledge the importance of Catherine's things while creating new memories with them. "The blue and white dishes?" Jenny asked, her expression wary. "Mama only used those for special occasions. That's why I thought we might use them tonight," Eleanor explained. "It's been exactly 1 month since I arrived in Silver Creek." Jenny shrugged. "That's not a special occasion." Eleanor maintained her patience. "It's important to me. Would you help set the table while I finish the cake?" "Why do I always have to do chores since you came?" Jenny complained. "Before, Papa didn't make me work all the time." This was blatantly untrue. Sam had mentioned several times that household routines had disappeared after Catherine's death, and Jenny had been allowed to abandon her responsibilities during their grieving. "Jenny, setting the table will take 5 minutes," Eleanor said. "The cake needs my attention now, or it will burn." "Then let it burn," Jenny muttered. "Mama's cakes never burned." Eleanor felt her patience fraying. "I'm doing my best to learn these recipes, Jenny. I know they're not exactly like your mother's cooking." "Nothing about you is like my mother," Jenny interrupted, her voice rising. "You changed our house. You make Papa work late all the time, and you're always making me do things I don't want to do." "That's enough," Eleanor said firmly. "I understand you miss your mother, but that doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful." "You're not my mother, and you never will be," Jenny shouted, her face flushed with emotion. Before Eleanor could respond, the girl bolted for the door, slamming it behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Eleanor stood in stunned silence, the cake forgotten. She expected Jenny to reappear in a few minutes, as she had during previous outbursts, retreating to the yard to sulk before hunger or boredom drove her back inside. But 30 minutes passed with no sign of her. Growing concerned, Eleanor checked the garden, the small stable where Sam's horses were kept, and even the cramped attic where Jenny sometimes hid with a book. No Jenny. A thread of worry wound through Eleanor's chest as she walked to the nearest neighbor's house, Mrs. Peterson, whose children sometimes played with Jenny. "I haven't seen her," Mrs. Peterson said, shading her eyes to scan her own yard. "A storm's coming, though. See those clouds? You had better find her before it hits." Eleanor thanked her and continued checking nearby homes, her concern mounting with each negative response. Looking west, she saw dark clouds gathering over the mountains. Mrs. Peterson was right. There was a potentially dangerous autumn storm brewing. After an hour of increasingly desperate searching, Eleanor sent Miguel's 12-year-old son, Tomas, to fetch Sam from the mine office. The boy ran off with the urgency of the situation clear in his stride. By the time Sam arrived, with Dr. Tom Grant beside him, Eleanor had checked every place she could think of, including Miss Perkins' home near the school. Sam's face was ashen when he learned Jenny had been missing for hours. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with fear. Eleanor explained the argument, trying to convey both the triviality of its beginning and the intensity of its conclusion. She was upset about setting the table with Catherine's china. You were using Catherine's good dishes? Sam interrupted sharply. I thought it might help include her memory in new traditions, Eleanor tried to explain. Sam raked a hand over his mouth. Where have you looked? Eleanor listed all the places she had checked, but Sam shook his head impatiently. Dr. Tom placed a steadying hand on Sam's shoulder. We'll organize search parties. Miguel is already gathering men from the mine. I'll get the Reverend and others from town. Within 30 minutes, the town had mobilized. Miguel led a group to search the wooded areas north of town. Dr. Tom and Reverend Moore headed east toward the creek, which was already rising from earlier rainfall upstream. Miners carrying lanterns fanned out across the property and nearby hills. Chapter 8. As the search continued through the stormy afternoon, Eleanor paced the kitchen floor, her sodden skirts dripping onto the wooden planks. The searchers had returned to report no sign of Jenny along the creek paths, and Sam's face had grown increasingly haggard with each negative report. We'll try the North Ridge next, Sam said, his voice hoarse from shouting Jenny's name into the wind. Miguel, gather fresh lanterns. It's getting dark. That area has steep drops. We need to be careful. Eleanor wrung her hands, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. There must be some place they hadn't checked, some place significant to Jenny that only a child would consider. Suddenly, a memory surfaced to Jenny's drawings pinned to her bedroom wall. Among them, several depicted what she called her secret cave, with large, colorful butterflies decorating the walls. Sam, Eleanor said, grasping his arm as he prepared to leave again. The butterfly cave, have you checked there? He frowned. What butterfly cave? Jenny has drawings of it in her room, a cave with butterflies. She mentioned it a few days ago when we were folding laundry. Eleanor struggled to recall the details of that rare, peaceful conversation. She said something about butterflies hibernating in what she called the old Ferguson mine. Sam shook his head dismissively. The Ferguson mine has been abandoned for years. It's too dangerous. Jenny knows she's forbidden from going near it. But children are drawn to forbidden places, Eleanor insisted, especially when they are upset. We should focus on the creek beds, Sam countered. The water's rising fast. If she's caught downstream... Let's be methodical, Dr. Tom interrupted. Sam, you take men to check the creek. I'll accompany Mrs. Blackwood to the Ferguson mine. It's a waste of time, Sam said sharply. We need every man searching the likely areas, not chasing female intuition. Eleanor flinched at his tone, but stood her ground. Jenny asked me about butterfly hibernation patterns while I helped her mend her doll's dress. She was particularly interested in the Ferguson mine and mentioned it more than once. Sam hesitated, clearly torn between following his own judgment and exploring every possibility, no matter how unlikely. The Ferguson mine is more than a mile away, he finally said. Why would she go so far in a storm? To find a safe place, Eleanor answered. A secret place no one would think to look. She met Sam's eyes directly. Please, Sam, let me check. What if she's there and we don't look? Something in her steady gaze must have reached him, for he finally nodded. Tom, take Miguel and 2 others with Mrs. Blackwood. I'll continue with the creek search in case she tried to cross it. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the paths into muddy streams. Dr. Tom led their small group through the darkness, lanterns casting weak halos against the deluge. Eleanor's drenched clothing clung to her body, but determination warmed her more effectively than any fire could have. The Ferguson mine was Sam's first investment, Dr. Tom explained as they trudged through the storm. It played out within 2 years, but gave him enough capital to develop the Blackwood mine. He sealed the main entrance after a partial collapse, but there's a side entrance children sometimes use despite warnings. The abandoned mine entrance appeared as a dark gash in the hillside, partially obscured by overgrown brush. Eleanor's heart leaped when Miguel's lantern illuminated small footprints in the mud, partially washed away by rain, but unmistakably made by a child's boot. Jenny, she called into the dark opening. Are you in there? Only the howling wind answered, but Miguel discovered a torn piece of white fabric caught on a branch near the entrance. It was the same material as Jenny's pinafore. She came this way, he confirmed, recently. The men lit additional lanterns, and Dr. Tom led them cautiously into the mine shaft. Water trickled down the walls, and the wooden support beams groaned ominously overhead. The tunnel stretched perhaps 50 yards before narrowing significantly, where a partial collapse had created a chaotic pile of rocks and timber. "Jenny!" Dr. Tom called, his voice echoing through the passage. "Can you hear us?" A faint sound came from beyond the debris. It was a child's whimper. "Help!" came Jenny's frightened voice. "I'm stuck." Relief and fear coursed through Eleanor in equal measure. They'd found her, but the tunnel's condition was precarious at best. "We're coming, Jenny," she called. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Jenny sobbed. "And it's dark. The rocks moved and made me fall down here, and I can't get out." They all hesitated at the fallen rock, unwilling to risk getting to her without Sam's help. Miguel quickly sent a runner to fetch him. As soon as Sam arrived, he assessed the situation, searching for a safe way to reach his daughter. "Jenny, it's Papa," he called. "We're going to get you out, just stay still." "Papa!" Jenny's relieved cry carried through the debris. "I'm scared. There's water coming in." The men began carefully removing rocks, but soon discovered the passage was more seriously compromised than it initially appeared. As Sam shifted a larger stone, a shower of smaller rocks cascaded down, accompanied by an ominous cracking sound from the support beams. "Stop," Miguel warned. "The whole thing could come down." Dr. Tom examined the pile carefully. "There's a small gap near the bottom. If someone could squeeze through, they might reach her while we find a safer way to clear the passage." Eleanor immediately stepped forward. "I'm the smallest, I can fit." "Absolutely not," Sam objected. "It's too dangerous." "She's trapped and frightened," Eleanor countered. "And if water is coming in where she is, we don't have time to argue." Another plaintive cry from Jenny strengthened Eleanor's resolve. Without waiting for permission, she knelt beside the small opening and assessed it. It was tight, but passable if she removed her outer clothing. "Mrs. Blackwood," Dr. Tom said quietly, "if the tunnel collapses further—" "Then work quickly," she replied firmly, already removing her soaked shawl and jacket. Sam caught her arm. "Eleanor? No. I'm sure I can figure out another way in." The genuine concern in his eyes surprised her, but she gently freed herself from his grasp. "You won't lose either of us, I promise," she said, instinctively knowing what he was afraid to say. Before he could object further, Eleanor laid flat and began inching through the narrow gap. Sharp rocks scraped against her back as she pushed forward with her elbows, breathing shallowly in the confined space. The lantern light receded behind her, leaving her in near total darkness. "Jenny," she called, "I'm coming through to you. Keep talking so I can find you." "Eleanor?" Jenny sounded surprised. "Be careful, the rocks keep falling." Eleanor continued crawling forward, ignoring the pain as stone edges tore her dress and scraped her skin. After what seemed an eternity, the passage widened slightly, and she found herself in a small chamber with the ceiling so low she could barely sit up. Jenny huddled against the far wall, her face tear-streaked and dirty, her right ankle visibly swollen. Water pooled around her, seeping in from cracks in the walls. "You're the one who came," Jenny whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. Eleanor crawled to her side, immediately wrapping her in her arms. "Of course I came. Everyone is looking for you." The girl trembled violently, as much from fear as cold. Eleanor quickly removed her own dress, thankful for the warm petticoat beneath, and wrapped it around Jenny's shoulders. "Your papa is just on the other side with Dr. Tom and Miguel," she explained, keeping her voice steady despite her awareness of their precarious situation. "They're clearing a safe path to get us out." As if confirming her words, Sam's voice carried through the debris. "Jenny, Eleanor, are you both all right?" "We're here," Eleanor called back. "Jenny's ankle is injured, but otherwise she's fine." "We're working as fast as we safely can," Sam replied. "The support beams are unstable. It may take a little time." Time was something Eleanor wasn't sure they had. The water level in their small chamber was slowly but steadily rising, and occasional showers of dirt and pebbles suggested the ceiling's stability was questionable at best. To distract Jenny from these ominous signs, Eleanor began humming softly, then singing a lullaby her own mother had taught her long ago. The simple melody seemed to soothe the girl, whose trembling gradually subsided. "I'm sorry," Jenny whispered when Eleanor paused. "I didn't mean to make everyone worry." "Why did you come all the way out here in the storm?" Eleanor asked gently. Jenny hesitated. "I wanted to be alone, to think about Mama." A larger chunk of ceiling crashed down nearby, making them both flinch. Eleanor pulled Jenny closer, positioning herself to shield the child from falling debris. "I'm afraid," Jenny admitted in the darkness. "I'm forgetting what Mama sounded like. Her face is getting blurry in my head." A sob escaped her. "What if I wake up one day and can't remember her at all?" Eleanor's heart ached at the raw pain in the child's voice. "I lost my mother when I was 11, she said softly. "Not much older than you are now." "You did?" Jenny's surprise was evident even in the darkness. "Yes. And I was terrified of forgetting her, too." Eleanor smoothed Jenny's tangled hair. "But you know what I discovered? Our hearts don't work that way. Your mother is part of you. She is in how you laugh, in how you see the world, and even in how stubborn you can be." This earned a small, watery laugh from Jenny. "The details might sometimes get fuzzy," Eleanor continued, "but the love doesn't fade. And remembering someone doesn't mean you can't care for others. Hearts expand rather than replace." "But what if loving someone else feels like betraying Mama?" Jenny whispered the question that clearly had been tormenting her. "Your mother will always be your mother," Eleanor assured her. "Nothing changes that. Not time, not distance, not even loving other people. She would want you to be happy, Jenny, to have people who care about you." A particularly loud crack overhead made Eleanor instinctively curl her body more protectively around Jenny. Water was now seeping steadily into their small space, reaching their knees where they sat. "They're taking too long," Jenny said fearfully. "Your father won't give up," Eleanor promised. "Neither will I." As if on cue, the sound of more focused digging reached them, along with Sam's voice calling their names with increasing urgency. "We're still here," Eleanor called back, "but please hurry. Water's coming in faster now." The next few minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the sounds of the men working and the increasingly frequent patter of falling debris. Eleanor continued humming, trying to project a calm she didn't feel as water crept higher around them. Suddenly, a larger section of rock shifted and light spilled through a newly created opening. Sam's face appeared, his expression transforming from fear to profound relief when he saw them. "Thank God," he breathed. "Jenny, can you come through?" "Her ankle's injured," Eleanor explained. "I'll help her." As Eleanor guided Jenny toward the opening, a deep, ominous rumble vibrated through the chamber. Without hesitation, Eleanor threw herself over Jenny as a section of ceiling collapsed, rocks striking her back and shoulders. Pain lanced through her, but she kept the girl sheltered beneath her. "Eleanor!" Sam's anguished cry barely registered through her pain. "Take Jenny first," she gasped, pushing the frightened child toward the opening where Sam's strong hands reached through. The moment Jenny was safely extracted, the men redoubled their efforts to widen the passage. Dr. Tom's concerned face appeared next. "You're bleeding," he observed grimly. "Can you move?" Eleanor nodded, though every movement sent fresh agony through her lacerated back. With gritted teeth, she crawled toward the opening, fighting waves of dizziness. Strong hands grasped her arms, pulling her carefully through the widened gap. As she emerged into the main tunnel, Sam gathered her gently in his arms, his expression a combination of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper she couldn't quite identify. "You're back," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he saw the torn dress and bleeding scrapes through the lantern light. "Jenny?" Eleanor asked, struggling to focus. "Dr. Tom has her. She's safe." Sam's arms tightened around her. "You saved her life." Eleanor wanted to explain that she had merely been in the right place at the right time, but darkness was encroaching on her vision. The last thing she registered was Sam's face looking at her, truly seeing her, for what felt like the first time since their wedding day. "Stay with me, Eleanor," he whispered urgently. It was the first time he had asked her to stay rather than merely accommodating her presence. As consciousness slipped away, Eleanor thought that alone made the pain worthwhile. Chapter 9. Eleanor woke to golden afternoon light streaming through her bedroom window. Disoriented, she blinked at the unfamiliar angle of sunshine, realizing she must have slept far longer than intended. Her back ached dully beneath the bandages Dr. Tom had applied, but the sharp pain had subsided to a manageable throb. The house was unusually quiet. Normally by this time, Sam would be at the mine and Jenny at school or playing outside. Eleanor pushed herself carefully to a sitting position, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing scrapes. The clock on the bedside table showed nearly 11 in the morning. The smell of something burning drifted up from downstairs, accompanied by a muffled curse that sounded distinctly like Sam. Curious, Eleanor pulled on her dressing gown over her nightdress and made her way slowly downstairs, each step a careful negotiation with her injured body. In the kitchen, she discovered Sam standing before the stove, a cast-iron pan smoking ominously while he attempted to scrape blackened remnants of what might have been eggs into the trash. A pot of coffee bubbled on the back burner, forgotten and overboiled. "Sam?" she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He turned quickly, surprise and embarrassment crossing his face. "Eleanor, you shouldn't be up." "I think I've slept enough," she replied, taking in the chaos of the kitchen. Flour dusted every surface, eggshells littered the counter, and something that might have been pancake batter congealed in a bowl. "What are you doing?" Sam grabbed onto his already disheveled hair. "Attempting breakfast." He gestured helplessly at the disaster surrounding him, though attempting is clearly the operative word. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling. "It's almost lunchtime." "Is it?" Sam glanced out the window with genuine surprise. "I thought it was earlier." He moved the smoking pan to a cool burner. "I sent word to the mine that I wouldn't be in today." The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Eleanor. In the months she'd known him, Sam had never willingly missed a day at the mine. "You didn't need to do that," she said softly. "I did." His voice was firm. "After last night, Jenny needs me here, and you shouldn't be alone while you're recovering." As if summoned by her name, Jenny appeared in the doorway, clutching a book to her chest. When she saw Eleanor standing in her dressing gown, her eyes widened. "You're supposed to be resting," she said accusingly. "Dr. Tom said so." "I'm feeling much better," Eleanor assured her. "Just a bit sore." Jenny shifted her weight from foot to foot, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I brought this," she finally said, holding out the book. "If you're not too tired, maybe you could read some?" Eleanor recognized the volume. It was an illustrated collection of fairy tales she'd noticed on Jenny's bookshelf, but had never seen the girl open. The request was the first voluntary interaction Jenny had initiated, and its significance wasn't lost on her. "I'd love to," Eleanor said simply, not wanting to make more of the moment than Jenny was comfortable with. Sam looked between them, a strange expression crossing his face. "Why don't I bring some tea to the sitting room?" he suggested, "after I clean some of this up." "I'll help," Jenny volunteered unexpectedly. "Eleanor should sit down." The domestic scene that followed felt surreal after weeks of tension. Eleanor settled on the sofa while Sam and Jenny brought tea and awkwardly made sandwiches to replace the ruined breakfast-turned-afternoon meal. Jenny sat beside Eleanor, not touching, but closer than she'd ever willingly positioned herself before, and opened the book to a story about a nightingale. "Mama used to read this one to me all the time," she said quietly. Eleanor began reading, keeping her voice steady despite the emotion rising in her throat. Sam sat in his chair across from them, ostensibly reviewing mining reports, but obviously listening to the story with half his attention. When Jenny eventually dozed off, the emotional exhaustion of her ordeal catching up with her, Sam carefully carried her upstairs for a proper nap. When he returned, he found Eleanor on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill, watching golden leaves spiral down from the trees lining the drive. Instead of returning to his paperwork, Sam surprised her by sitting beside her on the porch swing, leaving a respectful distance between them. "How's your back?" he asked. "Better than it could be," Eleanor replied. "Dr. Tom said I was lucky. No deep wounds, just scrapes and bruises." She paused. "I was more worried about Jenny. How is her ankle?" "Sprained, not broken. She'll need to rest it for a week or so." Sam pushed the swing into a gentle motion with one foot. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology." She turned to look at him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. "I've been unfair to you from the beginning," he continued, "bringing you here but not making space for you, expecting you to care for Jenny while keeping you at arm's length." "We barely knew each other," Eleanor said. "It's natural to be cautious." Sam shook his head. "It was more than caution. I've been afraid of change, of moving forward." He met her eyes directly. "Of failing someone else I'm responsible for." The quiet admission hung between them. Eleanor realized this was the moment for honesty, if they were ever to move beyond their careful, cordial arrangement. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you either," she said carefully, "about my first marriage." Sam waited silently, giving her space to continue. "Harold wasn't just a poor financial manager who left me destitute," Eleanor explained, her voice growing stronger as she finally spoke the truth aloud. "He was cruel, not physically. He was too concerned with appearances for that. He was cruel in ways that left no visible marks." The swing creaked gently as Eleanor described Harold's systematic undermining of her confidence, his public charm masking private cruelty, how he belittled her interests and isolated her from friends. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. "Once I suggested we might adopt a child," she said, the memory still painful years later. "He flew into such a rage, said I wasn't fit to raise a dog, let alone a child, that I'd ruin any child unlucky enough to have me as a mother." Sam's expression darkened with anger on her behalf. "That's why you hesitate with Jenny." Eleanor nodded. "Part of me believes him still, that I'm inadequate, unworthy of being trusted with a child's heart." She twisted her hands in her lap. "When I answered your advertisement, I thought a practical arrangement was all I deserved, all I could manage." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "When Catherine died," he finally said, voice low, "I was at the mine. A cave-in had trapped 3 men, and I was overseeing the rescue." His hands clenched. "She fell ill suddenly, with a fever that turned deadly within hours. By the time I got home—" His voice broke. "I wasn't there when she needed me most. I promised to protect her, and I failed." "Sam, that wasn't your fault," Eleanor said gently. "I know that here," he tapped his temple, "but not here." His hand moved to his chest. "I've been punishing myself ever since, working longer hours, keeping people at a distance, preserving everything exactly as she left it, as if changing anything would be a second betrayal." The realization dawned on them both simultaneously. They'd been trapped in the same prison of different making. Eleanor believed herself unworthy of love. Sam was convinced he didn't deserve happiness after failing Catherine. Both were unable to move forward, shackled by guilt neither deserved to carry. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked softly. Sam's hand found hers on the swing between them, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones with hesitant pressure. Maybe we stop punishing ourselves, he suggested, and try to build something new, not forgetting the past but not letting it dictate our future either. The touch of his hand, warm and solid against hers, felt more significant than their wedding ceremony had been. This was a genuine choice, a tentative step towards something neither had planned for, but both now recognized as possible. The next day brought another breakthrough. Eleanor found Jenny in Catherine's sewing room, looking through a box of keepsakes. Instead of the guilty start Eleanor had come to expect when the girl was caught handling her mother's things, Jenny looked up with deliberate calm. "These are Mama's letters to Papa," she explained, when she visited her sister in Chicago. Eleanor nodded, careful not to disturb this fragile moment. "They must be precious to you." "I can't read all the words," Jenny admitted. "Her handwriting is different from my school books." Eleanor recognized the implicit request. "Would you like help?" Jenny nodded. Could we read them together, so I can hear how she sounded?" They settled side by side in the window seat, sunshine warming them as Eleanor helped Jenny decipher Catherine's flowing script. Instead of the painful intrusion Eleanor had felt when she'd secretly read the letters in the attic, this felt like a gift, helping Jenny connect with her mother's words and thoughts. Sam found them there an hour later, Jenny asking questions about references in the letters she didn't understand. Instead of retreating, as Eleanor expected, he joined them, sitting across from them in Catherine's sewing chair. "What was Mama afraid of?" Jenny asked him, referencing a letter in which Catherine mentioned being frightened during a thunderstorm in Chicago, without Sam there to comfort her. For a moment, Eleanor feared Sam would shut down the conversation, protecting Jenny from any knowledge that made Catherine seem less than perfect. Instead, he surprised them both with a small smile. "Thunderstorms terrified her," he said. "She'd hide under blankets with her hands over her ears, but she never wanted you to know she was afraid, so she'd pretend she was making a blanket fort for fun during storms." Jenny's eyes widened. "Really? But she told me brave people aren't afraid of thunder." "She wanted you to be braver than she was," Sam explained. "Your mother was human, Jenny. She had fears and flaws just like everyone else." This opened a floodgate of questions about Catherine that Sam had previously been afraid to answer. Jenny asked about her favorite songs, her terrible attempts at making pie crust, and her habit of losing hairpins throughout the house. With each answer, the perfect saint Jenny had constructed in her grief transformed into something more valuable. She had been a real woman with strengths and weaknesses, who had loved her family fiercely. Later, Eleanor suggested creating a special corner in Jenny's room with Catherine's photograph and mementos, a place to honor her memory, while allowing life to continue around it. "Like a shrine?" Jenny asked. "Like a reminder," Eleanor corrected gently. "Not to trap her memory, but to give it a proper place of honor. Then, when you miss her most, you have somewhere special to feel close to her." Sam watched this exchange with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite decipher, part sorrow, part gratitude, part something warmer that made her cheeks flush when their eyes met. As they gathered around the table for dinner that evening, Sam hesitated before beginning their meal. "I thought we might say grace," he suggested. "It's something Catherine always did, and I let it lapse after." His voice trailed off, but Jenny nodded enthusiastically. "Mama always made us hold hands," she reminded him. Eleanor felt Sam's fingers close around hers, warm and strong, while Jenny took her other hand. The simple blessing Sam offered gave thanks not only for their food, but for safety, for healing, and for new beginnings we didn't expect, but now value deeply. When the prayer ended, Sam's hand remained around Eleanor's, his thumb tracing a small, soothing circle on her palm. The gentle pressure continued even after the Amen, a silent communication more eloquent than words. Chapter 10. The church hall buzzed with activity as Silver Creek's residents gathered for the harvest social. Tables lined the walls laden with pies, cakes, and savory dishes, while children darted between adults in games of tag. Eleanor stood near the refreshment table, surveying the scene with anticipation and nervousness. After 3 months in Silver Creek, she recognized most faces, though she still felt like an outsider at these community gatherings. "Eleanor," Luisa Fuentes called, waddling over with her pregnancy now prominently showing. "I've been looking for you. The children's games need organizing, and I'm too unwieldy to manage it." She gestured ruefully at her rounded belly. Eleanor hesitated. "Are you sure I'm the right person? I don't want to overstep." "Nonsense," Louisa insisted. "You were once a teacher, yes? And Jenny says you've organized wonderful games at home." The mention of Jenny warmed Eleanor's heart. The past weeks had brought remarkable changes in their relationship, small moments of connection that transformed their cautious coexistence into something approaching genuine affection. "Well, I do have some ideas that might work," Eleanor admitted, thinking of the educational games she'd developed in Boston. "Perfect." Louisa linked her arm through Eleanor's, steering her toward a cluster of restless children. "Everyone is tired of the same old sack races and egg tosses." Eleanor quickly assessed the group. There were about 15 children ranging from 4 to 12 years old, including Jenny, who gave a small wave from where she sat with her friends. Drawing on her teaching experience, Eleanor organized them into teams, explaining a modified version of charades that incorporated historical figures they'd been studying in school. As the children became engrossed in the game, squealing with laughter at particularly dramatic portrayals, Eleanor felt a familiar satisfaction. She'd forgotten how much she enjoyed working with children and their unfiltered enthusiasm and creative thinking. "Well, isn't this progressive?" came Mrs. Wilson's voice, pitched to carry across nearby conversations. Mrs. Blackwood taking charge of the children despite her limited maternal experience. Eleanor continued instructing a young boy on his turn, pretending not to hear, though her cheeks warmed at the deliberate barb. "Children need youthful energy," Martha continued to her circle of friends, who nodded in agreement. "Someone who understands their needs through experience, not just book learning." "Perhaps you'd like to take over the games, Mrs. Wilson," Eleanor finally responded, keeping her voice pleasant despite the tightness in her chest. She'd endured 3 months of similar comments from this woman, subtle critiques of her age, her Eastern ways, and her role as Jenny's stepmother. Mrs. Wilson's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of interfering. Though, perhaps Miss Jenkins or Mrs. Peterson might be more suitable. Being younger mothers, they naturally have more in common with the children." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a quiet determination replacing her usual desire to avoid conflict. After months of rebuilding herself in this new place, finding a connection with Jenny, and a tentative new understanding with Sam, she no longer wished to accept Mrs. Wilson's veiled insults. "Love and nurturing have no age limit, Mrs. Wilson," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Perhaps if we spent less time judging others' qualifications and more time offering kindness, all our children would benefit." A hush fell over the nearby conversations. Martha's face flushed with indignation as she realized Eleanor had finally stood her ground publicly. "Well, I never," she began. "I think Eleanor's doing a wonderful job," Louisa interrupted, moving to stand beside Eleanor. "The children are having more fun than they've had at these socials in years." "Her background as a teacher is invaluable," added Miss Perkins, joining them with quiet determination. "I've seen a remarkable improvement in Jenny's reading since Eleanor began working with her." Reverend Moore's wife, Abigail, stepped forward next. "The Lord doesn't measure our worth by age or circumstance, but by the love in our hearts," she said firmly. "And I see plenty of that in Mrs. Blackwood's work with these children." One by one, other women moved to Eleanor's side in silent support. Not all, but enough to make Mrs. Wilson's disapproval suddenly appear outnumbered. The children, oblivious to the adult tension, continued their game enthusiastically. "Well," Mrs. Wilson finally sniffed, "I was merely concerned for propriety." "Your concern is noted," Eleanor replied calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe it's Timmy Henson's turn to perform." As she returned to the children's game, Eleanor saw Sam entering the church hall, looking slightly disheveled from rushing from the mine. His eyes scanned the room until they found her, his expression changing to surprise as he took in the scene. Eleanor at the center of attention, her cheeks flushed with emotion but her posture straight and dignified, surrounded by supportive townswomen, while Mrs. Wilson retreated with clear displeasure. Sam made his way through the crowd, nodding greetings, but focused on reaching her side. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly when he reached her. "I saw Mrs. Wilson looking agitated, although I have to admit, that's nothing new." Eleanor smiled. "Everything's fine, just a small disagreement about children's activities." Mrs. Wilson suggested Eleanor wasn't suitable to organize games due to her age and inexperience as a mother, Louisa explained with uncharacteristic bluntness. Eleanor finally stood up to her. Sam's expression darkened. "She has no right." "It's handled," Eleanor assured him, touching his arm lightly, "and the children are having a wonderful time." She could see the town's fault lines more clearly now. Traditionalists like Mrs. Wilson versus those accepting of their unconventional family arrangement. What surprised her was finding herself at the center of this quiet social shift, when all she'd wanted was to build a peaceful life. "You've missed some impressive performances," she told Sam, deliberately changing the subject. "Jenny did an excellent Abraham Lincoln." As if on cue, Jenny approached, her earlier reticence around Sam in public settings noticeably diminished. "Papa, Mrs. Blackwood says we could put on a proper play next month if we practice," she said eagerly, "with costumes and everything." Sam looked between them, something softening in his expression. "Does she now? And what would this play be about?" "The first Thanksgiving," Jenny explained. "I could be Priscilla Alden." "That sounds ambitious," Sam remarked, but his tone was approving. "Eleanor has suggested some wonderful educational activities," Miss Perkins interjected. "In fact, I was hoping to discuss the possibility of her assisting at the school one day a week with reading lessons. Many of our students could benefit from her expertise." Eleanor hadn't expected this offer, and she glanced at Sam, unsure how he would feel about her taking on responsibilities outside their home. To her surprise, he nodded encouragingly. "Eleanor would be an asset to any classroom," he said, his public endorsement warming her more than she'd anticipated. The evening continued with Eleanor organizing the children into an impromptu theatrical performance. A simplified version of a historical scene she'd once directed in Boston years ago. The children's enthusiasm compensated for their lack of polish, and their performance drew appreciative laughter and applause from the audience, even reluctant smiles from Martha's supporters. Afterward, as people mingled over desserts, Sam was approached by a well-dressed gentleman Eleanor recognized as one of his mining investors. To her surprise, Sam beckoned her over. "Mr. Collins, I'd like you to meet my wife, Eleanor," Sam said. The words, "my wife," falling naturally from his lips for the first time in public. Not Jenny's stepmother or Mrs. Blackwood, but simply, "my wife." It was an acknowledgement of their relationship in its own right, rather than merely her functional role in his household. The subtle shift wasn't lost on Eleanor, whose smile deepened as she extended her hand to the investor. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Collins. I understand you've been instrumental in the mine's expansion." That evening, the walk home under a canopy of stars was peaceful, Jenny running ahead to show Miguel's children a shortcut, leaving Sam and Eleanor to follow at a more leisurely pace. "You surprised a lot of people tonight," Sam remarked. "Standing up to Mrs. Wilson isn't something most newcomers attempt." Eleanor smiled ruefully. "It wasn't planned. I just couldn't bear another comment about my unsuitability as a mother figure." Sam stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "You know, that's not how I see you, right? You've been exactly what Jenny needed, what we both needed." "Even with all my Eastern ways?" she teased gently. "Especially with those," he replied, his voice warming. "You brought life back to our home, Eleanor. You gave Jenny something I couldn't. understanding, about Catherine, about grief, and about moving forward without forgetting. He placed his arm around her waist, their first public display of affection, and she leaned slightly into his embrace as they continued walking. His solid warmth beside her felt right, a natural progression of the connection that had been building between them since the night of the mine rescue. "About Miss Perkins's offer to help teach at the school," Eleanor said. "Would you mind if I accepted?" "Mind?" Sam looked surprised. "Why would I mind?" "Some husbands prefer their wives to focus solely on home responsibilities," she explained, thinking of Harold's scorn when she'd once mentioned missing her teaching career. Sam shook his head. "Eleanor, your teaching is part of who you are. I wouldn't ask you to set it aside any more than you'd ask me to abandon mining." He paused thoughtfully. "Though I should warn you, once the town sees what you can do with students, they'll be clamoring for more of your time." "I believe Mrs. Wilson might have something to say about that," she commented wryly. Sam's laugh was unexpectedly carefree. "Mrs. Wilson has opinions about everything, but even she can't deny what everyone saw tonight, whether she wants to admit it or not. You belong here, Eleanor, with Jenny, with the community." He paused, his voice softening. "With me." Under the vast Colorado sky, Eleanor returned his smile, no longer feeling like a mail-order bride or Catherine's replacement, but simply herself. She was Eleanor Blackwood, finding her way home at last. Epilogue. On their 3-month wedding anniversary, Eleanor woke to find a note propped against the water pitcher on her bedside table. Sam's strong, angular handwriting was instantly recognizable. "Eleanor, please wear your good dress and be ready by noon. I have a surprise planned. Sam." The formal tone of their early correspondence had gradually softened into something more personal, but this mysterious invitation still made her heart flutter unexpectedly. She traced her finger over his signature, remembering the formal letters that had brought her to Silver Creek, and marveling at how much had changed. A knock at her door revealed Jenny, barely containing her excitement as she bounced on her toes. "Did you see Papa's note?" she asked, her eyes bright with conspiracy. "You know about this surprise?" Eleanor asked, amused by Jenny's apparent struggle to keep a secret. "Maybe," Jenny hedged, a sly smile on her lips. "Papa said I could help you get ready if you wanted." The offer touched Eleanor deeply. Just 3 months ago, Jenny had refused to be in the same room with her. Now she was eagerly participating in whatever Sam had planned. "I'd appreciate the help," Eleanor said. "Perhaps you could brush out my hair while I choose my jewelry?" Jenny nodded enthusiastically. "You should wear it up with some of those little curls Papa likes." "What do you mean?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, enjoying the girl's momentary fluster. "I heard him tell Dr. Tom your hair looked nice that way at church last Sunday," Jenny admitted, then added with childish directness, "He looks at you a lot when you don't notice." This simple observation warmed Eleanor from within. The gradual shift in her relationship with Sam, from practical arrangement to genuine partnership, had been building steadily since the night of the mine rescue, but they still navigated their evolving feelings with careful consideration. With Jenny's surprisingly skilled assistance, Eleanor dressed in her best gown, deep blue silk that had been restyled with help from Louisa to better suit Silver Creek's less formal standards. The girl chattered about her school project with Miss Perkins and the upcoming Christmas pageant while arranging Eleanor's auburn hair into an elegant twist with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Jenny declared when they finished, "like a picture in a magazine." Eleanor studied her reflection, noting the changes from the woman who had arrived in Silver Creek. Her face had gained healthy color from the mountain air, and the perpetually worried expression she'd carried from Boston had softened into something more serene. But the most noticeable difference was in her eyes. They held a confidence that had been missing for years. At precisely noon, the sound of wagon wheels announced Sam's arrival. Eleanor came downstairs to find him standing in the front hall, dressed in his good suit, his normally unruly hair neatly combed. When he saw her, admiration and something deeper crossed his face. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. "Where are we going?" "That's the surprise," Sam answered with uncharacteristic playfulness. He offered his arm with a formality that made Jenny giggle. "Your carriage awaits, Mrs. Blackwood." Outside, Eleanor discovered the wagon decorated with autumn wildflowers and mountain greenery. Sam helped her board with unprecedented gallantry, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. As they prepared to leave, Luisa Fuentes arrived with her children. "We're having our own adventure today," she explained to Eleanor with a knowing smile. "Jenny is teaching the children how to make paper ornaments for Christmas." Sam clicked the horses into motion, guiding them away from town and higher into the mountains, along a well-maintained trail. Eleanor enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, which was so different from the tense quiet of their early days together. "The mine is doing well," Sam said eventually. "The new equipment has increased production by 30%. Eleanor smiled at his attempt at casual conversation when his rigid posture betrayed his nervousness. "That's wonderful news. The men must be pleased with the improved safety measures, too." "They are." He glanced at her. "I've been thinking about your suggestion for the miners' families, about establishing a fund for education. It has merit. The children deserve opportunities," Eleanor said, "and educated workers will benefit the mine in the long term." Sam nodded. "That's what I told the board. They've approved a trial program starting after the new year." He paused. "I'd like you to help design it, with your teaching background." The request, acknowledging her expertise and inviting her to partner in his business, touched Eleanor deeply. With Harold, she'd been decorative at best, invisible at worst. Sam not only saw her, but valued her mind and abilities. The trail widened into a clearing at the edge of a spectacular overlook. Silver Creek spread below them, the town buildings miniaturized by distance, surrounded by the vast wilderness that had initially terrified Eleanor, but now felt like home. "This is breathtaking," she said, as Sam helped her from the wagon. "Catherine and I discovered it our first year here," he said, his voice steady as he mentioned his first wife. The ability to speak of Catherine without pain was new. It was a healing they had achieved together. "I haven't been back since, well, for a long time." Sam retrieved a basket from the wagon and spread a checkered cloth on a flat rock warmed by the autumn sun. The picnic he unpacked was surprisingly elaborate. There was cold chicken, fresh bread, early apples, and even a bottle of wine. "Sam Blackwood," Eleanor teased gently, "I had no idea you were capable of such romance." A flush colored his cheeks. "I had help from Louisa with the food," he admitted, "but the idea was mine." Once they were settled with filled plates, Eleanor noticed Sam's nervousness returning. He kept reaching into his pocket, then stopping himself. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked. "Yes, He took a deep breath. "I have something for you. 2 things, actually." He withdrew a small velvet pouch from his pocket and placed it in her hand. "Open this one first." Eleanor loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. Her breath caught at the sight of her grandmother's gold locket, the same one she had sold to purchase fabric for the sitting room months ago. "How did you—" "I bought it back from Jenkins the day after our argument," Sam explained. "I was too angry to give it to you then, and afterward, it never seemed the right time." Eleanor ran her finger over the familiar contours of the locket, emotion tightening her throat. "I thought it was gone forever. I couldn't bear that you'd sacrifice something so precious, especially after I reacted the way I did." Sam's voice held regret. "I didn't understand then what you were trying to do, but I do now. You were creating space for yourself in our home." Eleanor opened the locket, finding her grandfather's tiny portrait still safely inside. "Thank you for retrieving it," she said softly. Sam nodded, then reached into his other pocket. "This is the second gift." He handed her a small box of polished wood. Inside, Eleanor found an exquisite silver pendant on a delicate chain. Unlike the simple gold locket, this piece featured intricate silverwork surrounding a circular frame that contained something remarkable. There was a tiny portrait of all three of them, Sam, Eleanor, and Jenny, painted with extraordinary detail. "Sam," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful." "Miss Perkins did the portraits," he explained. "She studied miniature painting in Chicago before coming west." The symbolism wasn't lost on Eleanor. The three of them were together in one frame, a visual representation of the family they had become. "May I?" Sam asked, gesturing to the necklace. Eleanor nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His hands trembled slightly as he worked the clasp, his fingers brushing the warm skin at her nape in a touch that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. When she turned back to face him, Sam took her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen. "Eleanor," he began, voice unsteady. "When I wrote that advertisement for a wife, I thought I was looking for a mother for Jenny, someone to maintain our household." He squeezed her fingers gently. "But I found so much more in you." Tears threatened again as Eleanor saw the emotion in his eyes. "I never expected to feel this way again," he continued. "Real love isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it grows slowly, taking root when you least expect it." His voice deepened. "I love you, Eleanor, not just for what you've done for Jenny and our home, but for who you are, your strength, your compassion, your determined spirit." The words she had never expected to hear washed over her like warm rain, healing places inside her that had been parched for too long. "I came to Colorado seeking security," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "A practical arrangement that would provide safety after years of uncertainty." She met his gaze directly. "But I found a love I never thought possible." Sam's expression lightened with hope. "You love me too?" Eleanor smiled through gathering tears. "How could I not? I've treasured every small kindness. Your steady presence, the way you listen when I speak, and how you've made space for me in your life." She touched the silver pendant at her throat. "No one has ever seen me the way you do, Sam. Not even Harold in our early days." Sam's hands framed her face with gentle reverence. "May I kiss my wife? Properly this time." The question recalled their wedding day kiss and that awkward brush of lips on her cheek. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. Their first true kiss as husband and wife was both passionate and tender, a physical expression of feelings that had been building for months. Eleanor's arms circled his neck as Sam drew her closer, the mountain vista and picnic forgotten, as they finally acknowledged what had grown between them. When they eventually broke apart, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that months ago." Eleanor laughed softly. "We weren't ready then. We needed time to heal, to know each other." "And now?" he asked. "Now we begin again," she said, "not as strangers bound by a practical agreement, but as partners who choose each other, eyes wide open." They returned home at sunset to find the kitchen in disarray. There was flour dusting every surface, and a distinctly lopsided cake sitting proudly at the center of the table. Jenny's face, also dusted with flour, beamed with anticipation. "Surprise," she announced. "Louisa helped me bake a cake for your anniversary. It's a little uneven, but it tastes good." The domestic scene, so ordinary yet so precious, filled Eleanor's heart to overflowing. She remembered her first disastrous attempts at cooking in this kitchen, how foreign and unwelcoming it had felt. Now it was undeniably home. Sam surveyed the chaos with amusement rather than the irritation he might once have shown. "It looks like a baking tornado struck." Jenny giggled. "We had a small problem with the flour sack and the eggs." "Clearly," Eleanor laughed, brushing flour from the girl's cheek. Sam reached for the knife. Well, let's see how it tastes. The cake was indeed uneven and slightly underbaked in the center, but as they stood in the kitchen laughing at the culinary disaster, Eleanor felt a sense of completion. Sam stood with one arm around her waist, Jenny perched on a stool beside them, the three of them forming a tableau that would have been unimaginable months earlier. After Jenny went to bed, Sam and Eleanor lingered in the sitting room. The same room where they'd had their first serious argument was now transformed into a space that reflected both Catherine's memory and Eleanor's presence. Catherine's handcrafted quilt draped across the back of the sofa, while Eleanor's books filled the previously empty shelves. The blend no longer seemed discordant, but harmonious, with past and present coexisting peacefully. "I have one more surprise," Sam said quietly, taking Eleanor's hand. "If you're ready." He led her upstairs to the master bedroom, her bedroom since their wedding night, though Sam had continued sleeping in his office downstairs. Inside, Eleanor found Sam's personal belongings arranged alongside hers. His hairbrush was on the dresser, his books were on the nightstand, and his robe hung beside hers. "Sam?" she questioned softly. "I thought perhaps it was time," he said, suddenly uncertain, "for us to truly be husband and wife. But only if you want." Eleanor silenced his doubt with a kiss, her answer clear in the way she drew him closer. Later, as moonlight painted silver patterns across their bed, Eleanor lay in the circle of Sam's arms, listening to his steady breathing. The journey from mail-order bride to beloved wife had been neither straight nor easy, but its winding path had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Outside their window, the Colorado sky spread endlessly above Silver Creek, stars blazing in the mountain darkness. Eleanor thought of how terrified she'd been arriving here, how foreign everything had seemed, how uncertain her place in this house was. Now, nestled against her husband's warm body, with Jenny sleeping peacefully down the hall, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that she was home. They were building together, not just in this house or town, but in this life, a life crafted from broken beginnings into something beautiful and strong. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor's hand curled around the silver pendant at her throat. Their three faces together in one circle, a family created not by blood or circumstance, but by choice, patience, and love that had grown quietly but persistently, like wildflowers taking root in mountain stone.